Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Midnight True Crime Stories. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Control doesn't always look like violence at first. Sometimes it looks like love, wrapped in concern and devotion. Sometimes it looks like ambition, dressed up as vision and leadership. Sometimes it looks like success, painted over with wealth and influence. But underneath, it's always the same. It's about power. It's about one person deciding they have the right to own another person's choices, their freedom, their life. Tonight, you're going to hear 5 stories. 5 different people from 5 different worlds. They never knew each other. They lived in different countries, walked different paths, dreamed different dreams. But they all encountered the same darkness, just wearing different masks. One was a mother who thought leaving would save her. One was a student who made a single choice on an ordinary night. One was a teenager desperate to belong. One was a woman surrounded by luxury who couldn't see the cage. And one was a dreamer who believed in a vision that consumed everything. These stories aren't easy. They're not meant to be. But they're real, and they matter, because somewhere right now, someone is facing the same warning signs these people faced. Somewhere right now, someone is making the same rationalizations, ignoring the same red flags, hoping things will get better on their own. This video is for them. And it's for you, because awareness is the first line of defense. Names have been changed. Locations have been altered. But the truth remains. These things happened. They could happen again. And the only way to stop them is to recognize the patterns before it's too late. Elena Ward was the kind of person who lit up a room without trying. In Harbor City, a bustling coastal town known for its marina and tight-knit neighborhoods, Elena was a fixture at the community center where she taught youth sports. She had this energy about her, this way of making every kid feel seen and valued. Parents trusted her. Children adored her. She was strong, not just physically, but in that deeper way, the kind of strength that comes from weathering storms and still choosing to smile. She had 3 children of her own, all under 12. Her life revolved around them. Soccer practice, homework help, bedtime stories. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, but she never complained. That wasn't who Elena was. She was a fighter, always had been. Growing up, she'd learned that you didn't wait for life to hand you opportunities. You created them. You pushed forward even when everything told you to quit. That resilience, that refusal to give up, it would later become both her greatest strength and her most dangerous vulnerability. Marcus Hale appeared in Elena's life on a Wednesday evening in spring. She was leaving the community center, bags of sports equipment slung over her shoulder, when her car wouldn't start. Marcus happened to be walking by. He offered to help, insisted on it really, with that easy charm that some people just have. He was handsome in a rugged way, well-dressed but not ostentatious, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes. He got her car started. They talked while he worked. He was funny, attentive, asked questions about her kids in a way that seemed genuinely interested. When he asked for her number, Elena hesitated only briefly. She hadn't dated in years, hadn't wanted to. Her focus was her children. But Marcus seemed different. Safe. Normal. Their first few dates were lovely. Marcus took her to nice restaurants, places she'd never been able to afford on her own. He brought gifts for her children, nothing excessive, just thoughtful little things. Action figures for her sons, a craft kit for her daughter. He integrated himself into their lives gradually, naturally. The kids liked him. Elena's mother liked him. Her friends thought she'd finally found someone good. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't quite fit. Like the time Elena laughed at something her coworker said, and Marcus went quiet for the rest of the evening. When she asked what was wrong, he said nothing, but his jaw was tight, his responses clipped. Or the time she mentioned grabbing coffee with an old friend, and Marcus asked who, where, for how long, what did they talk about? She told herself he was just interested, just being involved. 6 months into the relationship, Marcus moved in. It happened faster than Elena had planned, but he'd been having issues with his landlord, and it seemed to make sense financially. He contributed to rent. He helped with the kids. On the surface, everything looked perfect. That's when the monitoring started. Subtle at first. Marcus wanted to know where she was, not in an accusatory way, just checking in, he said. He'd text throughout the day. How's work? When are you heading home? Who's that in the background? If she didn't respond quickly enough, he'd call. If she didn't answer the call, he'd show up. At her workplace, at her friend's house, at her mother's apartment. I was worried, he'd say, and Elena would feel guilty for making him worry. She started responding faster, started declining invitations to go out. It was easier than dealing with the questions, the tension, the way Marcus would shut down and make her feel like she'd done something wrong. Her friends noticed. Sarah, who'd known Elena since high school, pulled her aside one afternoon. "You okay?" Sarah asked. "You seem different lately. We never see you anymore." Elena forced a smile. "Just busy with the kids, you know how it is." "It's not the kids," Sarah said carefully. "It's him. Marcus. He's always around. Always watching." "Elena, it doesn't feel right." Elena's defenses went up immediately. "You don't know him like I do. He's protective, that's all. After everything I've been through, is it so wrong that someone cares?" Sarah backed off, but the concern never left her eyes. That was the last real conversation they had for months. The isolation happened so gradually that Elena didn't see it as isolation. She saw it as simplifying her life, focusing on what mattered. But what mattered, according to Marcus, was him and the children. Not her friends, not her hobbies, not her independence. He started making comments about her appearance. Small criticisms wrapped in concern. "Are you sure you want to wear that? It's a bit much, don't you think? Or, maybe you should skip dessert tonight. I'm just looking out for your health." Elena, who'd always been confident in her own skin, found herself second-guessing everything. Changing clothes multiple times before leaving the house. Declining food, even when she was hungry. The financial control came next. Marcus suggested they combine their bank accounts, for convenience. Elena hesitated, but he was persuasive. It would make paying bills easier, he said. They were a family now, weren't they? She agreed, and within weeks, Marcus was monitoring every purchase. He questioned grocery receipts. He demanded explanations for small expenses. If Elena bought herself something, anything, Marcus would go silent for hours, making her feel selfish and irresponsible. "I work hard for this money," he'd say, even though Elena was working 2 jobs while he worked 1. "I just think we should be smarter about spending." Elena's paychecks were deposited into the joint account. She no longer had access to her own money without Marcus knowing, without Marcus approving. She was trapped financially, and she didn't even realize it yet. The children started noticing changes too. Marcus was strict with them, far stricter than Elena had ever been. He implemented rules about everything. When they could watch television, what they could eat, how they should sit at the dinner table. If they broke a rule, even accidentally, Marcus would punish them. Timeouts that lasted hours. Taking away their toys. Speaking to them in a cold, harsh tone that made Elena's stomach turn. When she tried to intervene, Marcus would explode. Not physically, not yet, but with words that cut just as deep. "You're too soft on them," he'd shout. "That's why they don't respect you. That's why they're undisciplined. I'm trying to help, and you undermine me at every turn." Elena would apologize. She'd learned that apologizing was easier than fighting. Easier than the silent treatment that would follow. The days of Marcus acting like she didn't exist, making her feel like she was losing her mind. One evening, Elena's oldest son came to her crying. He was 10 years old, and he'd wet the bed, something that hadn't happened in years. Marcus had screamed at him, called him names, made him sleep on the floor as punishment. Elena's heart broke. She held her son and promised it would be okay, but she didn't know how to make that promise true. That night, after the children were asleep, Elena tried to talk to Marcus. "You were too hard on him," she said quietly. "He's just a child. He didn't mean to." Marcus turned on her with a fury she'd never seen before. His face went red. His fists clenched. For a moment, Elena thought he might hit her. He didn't. But he got close, so close she could feel his breath on her face, and he said in a low, dangerous voice, "Don't you ever question my authority in front of those kids again. Do you understand me? This is my house now. My rules. You'd be nothing without me." Elena nodded, terrified, and Marcus walked away. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she'd gotten here. Wondering when the man she'd fallen for had turned into this stranger. Wondering if it was her fault. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe if she just tried harder, things would go back to how they were in the beginning. But things never go back. They only go forward, and forward in Elena's case meant darker, more dangerous territory. Marcus started drinking more. He'd always had a beer or two after work, but now it was a six-pack, then more. The alcohol made him mean. He'd pick fights over nothing. The house wasn't clean enough. Dinner wasn't ready on time. Elena was looking at him wrong. She was breathing too loud. The first time Marcus pushed her, Elena told herself it was an accident. They were arguing, and he'd stepped toward her too quickly, and she'd stumbled backward into the wall. But the second time wasn't an accident. He shoved her hard, and she fell, hitting her head on the corner of the coffee table. Blood dripped down her face. The children, watching from the hallway, screamed. Marcus was immediately apologetic. He helped her up. He got ice. He cried, actual tears, and said he didn't know what came over him. He promised it would never happen again. He loved her. He needed her. Please, please forgive him. And Elena, because she was tired and scared and didn't know where else to go, forgave him. But it did happen again. And again. Each time, Marcus had an excuse. Work stress. Financial pressure. Elena had provoked him. If she'd just listened. If she'd just been more understanding. If she'd just done what he asked. The violence was always her fault, according to Marcus, and after a while, Elena started to believe him. She covered the bruises with makeup. She lied to her mother, to her friends, to herself. Everything was fine. Marcus was going through a rough patch. Things would get better. She just had to be patient. She just had to try harder. She couldn't leave. Where would she go? She had no money. No resources. Marcus had made sure of that. But the moment that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena was at work when her daughter's school called. There'd been an incident. Her daughter had broken down crying in class, and when the teacher asked what was wrong, she'd said that Marcus had hurt her brother the night before. Badly. The school was required to report it. Child Protective Services showed up at Elena's door that evening. Marcus wasn't home. The investigator, a woman named Claire with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, sat Elena down and asked questions. Hard questions. Direct questions. Have the children been hurt? Has Marcus been violent? Are you safe? Elena wanted to lie. She'd gotten so good at lying. But her daughter was sitting right there, looking at her with those big, trusting eyes, and Elena couldn't do it. She broke. She told Claire everything. The control. The isolation. The financial abuse. The physical violence. The fear that had become her constant companion. Claire listened without judgment. When Elena finished, Claire said, "You need to leave. Tonight. We can help you. There are resources. Shelters. Legal aid. But you have to leave now, before he comes home." Elena packed 3 bags. One for each child. She took what she could carry. Photos. Important documents. The kids' favorite toys. Claire drove them to a domestic violence shelter across town. A place Marcus didn't know about, couldn't find. For the first time in months, Elena felt like she could breathe. The shelter was safe, but stark. Small rooms. Shared bathrooms. Rules about coming and going. But the women there understood. They'd been where Elena was. They knew the fear, the shame, the exhausting effort it took to survive every single day. Elena wasn't alone anymore, and that realization brought her to tears. She filed for a protection order the next day. The court granted it. Marcus was served with papers prohibiting him from contacting Elena or the children. He was not allowed within 500 feet of them. If he violated the order, he'd be arrested. Elena felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was finally free. Marcus didn't see it that way. To him, Elena's departure was the ultimate betrayal, an unforgivable act of defiance. She was his. She belonged to him. How dare she leave? How dare she take his children? How dare she humiliate him with a protection order, making him look like the villain when he'd done nothing but love her? He started calling from different numbers. When Elena stopped answering, he sent text messages. Hundreds of them. Some were apologetic, begging her to come back, promising he'd change. Others were threatening, promising he'd make her pay for what she'd done. Elena saved every message and reported each violation to the police. They told her they'd look into it, but nothing happened. Marcus was never arrested, never held accountable. He started showing up places. Outside the shelter, though he couldn't get in. Outside the grocery store where Elena worked part-time. Outside her mother's apartment. Every time, Elena called the police. Every time, they'd arrive too late, or Marcus would claim he was just in the area, just passing by. He wasn't trying to violate anything. The officers would give him a warning and leave. Elena felt the protection order was worthless, just a piece of paper that Marcus ignored with impunity. Her friends and family urged her to stay strong. The shelter staff assured her she was doing the right thing. The children, slowly, started to relax. They laughed again. They played. They stopped flinching at loud noises. Elena dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd be okay. 3 months after she left, Elena found a small apartment. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms in a not-great neighborhood, but it was hers. She and the children moved in on a Saturday. Her mother helped. Sarah came by with housewarming gifts. For the first time in years, Elena felt optimistic about the future. She enrolled in a night class, thinking about finishing the degree she'd abandoned years ago. She started saving money, actual money that Marcus couldn't touch. Life wasn't easy, but it was better. So much better. Marcus found out about the new apartment within days. Elena didn't know how. Maybe he'd followed her. Maybe someone had inadvertently mentioned it. But he knew, and knowing wasn't enough for him. He wanted her back, wanted his control back, and if he couldn't have that, then no one would. On a Thursday morning, Elena dropped her children off at school. It was a bright, clear day. She kissed each of them goodbye, told them she loved them, reminded them she'd pick them up at 3. Her oldest son hugged her tight, tighter than usual, and said, "I love you, Mom." She ruffled his hair and smiled. It was the last time she'd see them as their mother, whole and alive. Elena went to work. Her shift at the grocery store started at 9. She was stocking shelves when Marcus walked in. She saw him before he saw her, and her heart stopped. She immediately went to her manager, told him Marcus was there, told him about the protection order. The manager called the police. But police take time to arrive, and Marcus wasn't interested in waiting. He approached her in the cereal aisle. He was calm, eerily calm. "Elena," he said, "we need to talk." "You're not supposed to be here," Elena said, backing away. "You need to leave." "I just want to talk," Marcus said, stepping closer. "Please, just hear me out." Other customers were watching now. An employee, a young man named David, stepped between them. "Sir, you need to leave. Now." Marcus looked at David like he was an insect. "This doesn't concern you." "The police are on their way," David said, trying to sound authoritative. "You need to go." Marcus pulled out a gun. Later, people would say it seemed to appear out of nowhere, like he'd conjured it. Elena screamed. David put his hands up. Customers scattered, diving behind displays, running for the exits. And Marcus, with that same eerie calm, pointed the gun at Elena. "If I can't have you," he said, "no one can." He fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena fell. Marcus stood over her and fired again. And again. By the time the police arrived, Marcus was gone, and Elena was lying in a pool of blood, her life slipping away while a paramedic desperately tried to save her. She died before they could get her to the hospital. She was 34 years old. Her children became orphans that day, taken in by Elena's mother, who would spend the rest of her life raising her grandchildren and mourning her daughter. Marcus was found 2 days later, holed up in a motel on the outskirts of town. He didn't resist arrest, didn't show remorse. When detectives asked him why he did it, he said, "She was mine. She had no right to leave." He was charged with first-degree murder. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from the grocery store showed everything. Witnesses testified. Marcus's threatening text messages were entered into evidence. His defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, but the jury wasn't buying it. This wasn't a moment of passion. This was premeditated murder driven by a need to control. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Elena's mother, sitting in the courtroom, wept openly. The children weren't there. They were too young to understand fully, but they'd grow up knowing their mother had been taken from them by a man who claimed to love her. The case made headlines locally. "Domestic violence turns deadly," the papers said. "Woman murdered despite protection order." There was brief outrage. Calls for better enforcement. Demands that the system do more to protect victims. But the outrage faded. The headlines moved on. And Elena Ward became another statistic, another name in a long, tragic list of women killed by intimate partners. But her story didn't end there. Her death sparked something in Harbor City. A coalition of advocates, survivors, and concerned citizens came together to push for change. They lobbied for stricter enforcement of protection orders. They demanded that police take violations seriously, that consequences be real and immediate. They created a fund in Elena's name to help domestic violence survivors escape dangerous situations, providing them with money for housing, legal fees, transportation, whatever they needed to get out. Elena's children grew up knowing their mother was a fighter, that she tried to save them, that she died trying to build a better life. Her oldest son, the one who hugged her so tightly that last morning, would later become an advocate himself, speaking at schools and community centers about recognizing the signs of abuse, about the importance of intervening, about how silence enables violence. Elena's story is a reminder that leaving is often the most dangerous moment for someone in an abusive relationship. The moment they reclaim their power is the moment the abuser feels they've lost control. And for some abusers, that loss of control is intolerable. They'd rather destroy than let go. Elena did everything right. She left. She filed for protection. She reported violations. She tried to rebuild. But the system failed her. The warnings weren't heeded. The threats weren't taken seriously. And a woman who deserved safety, who deserved a future, was killed in broad daylight while people watched. Her story isn't just about one man's violence. It's about all the small failures that added up to a tragedy. It's about a society that still, too often, treats domestic violence as a private matter instead of the public safety crisis it is. It's about the work we still have to do to ensure that the next Elena, the next woman trying to escape, actually makes it out alive. Lydia Monroe was 23 years old and on top of the world, or at least it felt that way to her. She was a third-year law student at Stonebridge University, a prestigious institution known for its rigorous academic programs and beautiful historic campus. Lydia was brilliant, driven, and well-liked. She had her whole life mapped out. Graduate with honors, land a position at a top firm, make a difference in the world. She came from a close family in the Midwest. Her parents were hard-working people who'd saved for years to help with her education. Lydia called them every Sunday without fail. Her younger sister idolized her. Friends described her as warm, funny, someone who could light up any room. She had this infectious optimism, this belief that if you worked hard and stayed true to yourself, good things would come. Stonebridge was a small university town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Students studied at the same coffee shops, drank at the same bars, lived in the same apartment complexes. It was safe, or it felt safe. Crime was rare. Violent crime was almost unheard of. That sense of security, that belief that nothing bad could happen here, was part of the town's identity. Lydia lived in an apartment near campus with two roommates, both also law students. They were her closest friends, Jessica and Amanda. The three of them had met during their first year and instantly clicked. They studied together, cooked together, complained about professors together. They were more than roommates. They were family. On a Friday night in late March, Lydia, Jessica, and Amanda decided to go out. They'd just survived midterms, and they needed to blow off steam. The plan was simple. Hit a few bars downtown, have some drinks, dance, laugh, forget about the stress of school for one night. They started at a pub called The Lantern, a student favorite known for cheap beer and loud music. The place was packed, as it always was on Friday nights. Lydia was in high spirits. She'd just gotten an A on a particularly difficult exam. She was celebrating, dancing with her friends, meeting new people. At one point, a guy from her contracts class bought her a drink. They chatted for a while, but there was no spark. He wandered off, and Lydia rejoined her friends. Around midnight, they moved to a second bar, a place called the Rusty Nail. It was smaller, more intimate, with live music and craft cocktails. Lydia ordered a Manhattan. Jessica got a martini. Amanda stuck with beer. They found a table in the corner and settled in, talking about everything and nothing, the way close friends do. The night was perfect until Amanda got sick. Too much to drink, too fast. She was in the bathroom for 20 minutes, and when she emerged, she was pale and miserable. "I need to go home," she said. Jessica, ever the responsible one, offered to take her. "Come on," she said to Lydia. "Let's call it a night." But Lydia didn't want to leave. She was having fun. The night was still young. "I'll stay for one more drink," she said. "Then I'll catch a ride." Jessica hesitated. "You sure?" "Positive," Lydia said. "Go take care of Amanda. I'll be fine." Jessica and Amanda left. Lydia stayed. She finished her drink, ordered another, struck up a conversation with a couple at the bar. She didn't feel unsafe. Why would she? This was Stonebridge. This was her town. Nothing bad happened here. At around 2 in the morning, Lydia decided it was time to head home. She pulled out her phone to call a rideshare. The app said her ride would arrive in 8 minutes. She stepped outside to wait. The street was quiet. Most of the bars were closing. Small groups of students wandered past, heading home or to after parties. Lydia stood under a streetlight, scrolling through her phone, when a car pulled up. It was a dark sedan, the kind commonly used for rideshares. The driver rolled down the window. "Lydia," he said. She looked at her phone. The app showed her ride was still 5 minutes away. But the driver had her name. Maybe the app was delayed. Maybe he'd arrived early. She hesitated for just a second, then made a decision that would cost her everything. "Yeah, that's me," she said, and she got in the car. The driver was a man in his 30s, average-looking, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't say much as he drove, which Lydia appreciated. She was tired, ready to be home. She leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. It took her a few minutes to realize they weren't going the right way. She sat up, looked around. "Excuse me," she said. "I think you missed the turn." "No, I didn't," the driver said. "My apartment is back that way," Lydia said, pointing. "We're not going to your apartment," the driver said, and that's when Lydia knew something was very, very wrong. She reached for the door handle. Locked. She tried to unlock it. The child lock was on. Panic flooded her system. "Let me out," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let me out right now." The driver said nothing. He drove faster, turning onto a dark road that led away from town, away from lights and people and safety. Lydia screamed. She pounded on the windows. She pulled out her phone to call for help, but the driver reached back and grabbed it, throwing it out the window. What happened next would haunt investigators for months. The driver, whose name was Caleb Royce, took Lydia to an abandoned hunting cabin 15 miles outside Stonebridge. He kept her there for hours. He tortured her. He assaulted her. He took his time, and when he was finished, he killed her. He buried her body in a shallow grave in the woods behind the cabin. When Jessica woke up Saturday morning and saw that Lydia hadn't come home, she assumed Lydia had crashed at someone else's place. It wasn't unusual, but when Lydia didn't respond to texts or calls all day, Jessica started to worry. By Saturday evening, she was frantic. She called Lydia's parents. She called the police. She reported Lydia missing. The police took the report but weren't immediately concerned. Lydia was an adult. She'd been out drinking. Maybe she'd met someone. Maybe she'd decided to extend her night. Give it another day, they said. She'll probably turn up. But Lydia didn't turn up. Sunday came and went. Monday, Tuesday, Jessica and Amanda were beside themselves. They posted on social media. They organized search parties. Lydia's parents drove down from the Midwest, desperate for answers that no one had. The break in the case came from security footage. A local business owner, seeing the news coverage, checked his cameras and found footage of Lydia standing outside the Rusty Nail, getting into a dark sedan. The timestamp was 2:07 a.m. The footage was grainy, but it was something. Police circulated images of the car, asking anyone with information to come forward. A woman named Patricia called the tip line. She recognized the car. It belonged to her neighbor, Caleb Royce. She'd seen it in his driveway for years. She hadn't thought much of it until she saw the news. Caleb was quiet, kept to himself. He worked odd jobs, mostly night shifts. He'd never caused trouble. But now that she thought about it, there was something off about him. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Police obtained a warrant and searched Caleb's property. They found Lydia's phone in a dumpster behind his apartment. They found traces of blood in his car, blood that would later be matched to Lydia through DNA testing. They found scratches on Caleb's arms, defensive wounds from a victim who'd fought back. And when they questioned him, his story fell apart. He claimed he'd been home all night, but his phone's location data put him in the area where Lydia was last seen. Confronted with the evidence, Caleb confessed. He led police to the cabin. He showed them where he'd buried Lydia. Investigators unearthed her body on a cold Thursday morning, 10 days after she'd disappeared. She was still wearing the clothes she'd had on that night, the jeans and sweater she'd picked out with such care, never imagining they'd become the outfit she died in. Lydia's parents identified the body. Her father collapsed. Her mother screamed. Jessica and Amanda, waiting outside the coroner's office, held each other and sobbed. The news spread through Stonebridge like wildfire. Vigils were held. Students wore ribbons in Lydia's favorite color. The university held a memorial service. Professors spoke about her brilliance. Friends shared memories. Her sister, barely holding it together, read a eulogy that left not a single dry eye in the room. Caleb Royce was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. His trial was a media circus. The prosecution laid out a damning case. The evidence was irrefutable. Caleb had hunted Lydia that night. He'd posed as a rideshare driver, a tactic he'd used before, though Lydia was the first victim he'd killed. Investigators found evidence he'd been watching women outside bars for weeks, learning patterns, identifying targets. The defense tried to argue that Caleb had mental health issues, that he wasn't fully in control of his actions. But the premeditation was clear. He'd modified his car to prevent escape. He'd scouted the cabin location in advance. He'd brought tools, supplies, everything he needed to carry out his plan. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of insanity. This was calculated, deliberate evil. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Caleb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no remorse. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at Lydia's family as they gave their victim impact statements. He was a black hole of empathy, and the world was better with him locked away forever. But Lydia was still gone. Her future, all that potential, all those dreams, snuffed out in a single night because she made one small mistake. She trusted that a car was what it appeared to be. She got in without verifying. It's a mistake so many people make, and most of the time, nothing happens. But for Lydia, that one mistake was fatal. Her death sparked a movement. Students at Stonebridge and universities across the country demanded better safety measures. Rideshare companies implemented new verification systems. Users could now check the license plate, see a photo of the driver, confirm details before getting in the car. Some apps added a panic button, a way to alert authorities if something went wrong. Bars started offering safe ride programs, ensuring students had a way to get home. Lydia's parents, channeling their grief into action, founded a nonprofit in her name. The Lydia Monroe Foundation focused on educating young people about personal safety, providing resources for avoiding dangerous situations, and supporting families of crime victims. They spoke at schools, at conferences, at anyone who would listen. They turned their daughter's death into a mission to save others. Jessica and Amanda both graduated law school, but neither of them could stay in Stonebridge. The town held too many memories, too much pain. Jessica moved to New York and became a prosecutor specializing in violent crimes. Amanda went into victim advocacy, helping survivors navigate the legal system. They stayed in touch with Lydia's parents, united by their shared loss, determined to honor Lydia's memory by making the world a little bit safer. Lydia's story is a reminder that evil often wears a mask of normalcy. Caleb Royce was no monster in appearance. He was just a man, ordinary and unremarkable, someone you wouldn't look at twice. But beneath that ordinary exterior was a predator, and Lydia had the misfortune of crossing his path on a night when she let her guard down for just a moment. Her story isn't about blame. Lydia did nothing wrong. She was a young woman trying to get home safely. The blame rests entirely on Caleb, on his choices, on his cruelty. But her story is about awareness, about the importance of verification, about trusting your instincts when something feels off, about understanding that the world, as much as we want it to be, isn't always safe, and that vigilance, while exhausting, can be the difference between life and death. Maribel Knox was 15 years old when she arrived at Ironwood Technical Institute, a boarding school in rural upstate New York known for troubled teens. She'd been sent there by her parents, who didn't know what else to do. Maribel had been struggling for years. Depression, anxiety, behavioral issues. She'd run away from home twice. She'd been cutting herself. Her parents, loving but overwhelmed, hoped that Ironwood, with its structured environment and therapeutic programs, would help her find stability. Maribel was small for her age, with dark hair and guarded eyes. She didn't trust easily. She'd learned early in life that people let you down, that promises were often broken, that the safest thing was to keep everyone at arm's length. At Ironwood, she was assigned to a dormitory with other girls, all dealing with their own demons, all trying to survive in a system that claimed to care, but often felt cold and institutional. For the first few weeks, Maribel kept to herself. She attended classes. She went to therapy sessions. She followed the rules. But she was lonely, desperately so. She missed her family, even though her relationship with them was complicated. She missed her little brother. She missed her dog. She missed the life she'd left behind, even if that life had been difficult. Then she met Rhea Cole. Rhea was 17, charismatic, and magnetic in the way that certain people are. She had this energy, this confidence, that drew others to her. She didn't follow rules. She didn't care what adults thought. She was rebellious in a way that felt exciting to someone like Maribel, who'd spent her whole life feeling like she didn't fit in anywhere. Rhea took an interest in Maribel. She sat with her at lunch. She invited her to hang out after classes. She introduced her to her friends, Damon Pike and Lena Frost. Damon was 16, quiet but intense, with a fascination for violence and death that he didn't bother hiding. He wore black exclusively. He drew disturbing images in his notebooks. He talked about how the world was broken, how people were weak and deserving of suffering. Lena was 15 like Maribel, but she seemed older. She'd been at Ironwood longer than any of them. She'd seen things, done things, that she hinted at but never fully explained. Together, the four of them formed a tight-knit group. They were outsiders among outsiders, bonded by their shared sense of alienation. They started spending all their time together, skipping classes, sneaking out at night, engaging in behaviors that pushed boundaries. They shoplifted from the town's general store. They vandalized school property. They created rituals, bizarre ceremonies involving candles and chants, a mix of occult symbolism and teenage rebellion that felt powerful and transgressive. Maribel, desperate to belong, went along with everything. When Rhea stole a bottle of vodka from a counselor's office, Maribel drank it. When Damon suggested they carve their initials into the trunk of a tree in the woods, Maribel carved hers too. When Lena proposed they sneak into the school's chapel and deface religious statues, Maribel helped. She wasn't comfortable with any of it, but she was terrified of being rejected, of losing the only friend she had. The group's behavior escalated. They started talking about bigger acts, more significant transgressions. Damon was obsessed with the idea of killing. He'd watched videos online, read books about serial killers, studied methods and techniques. He talked about it constantly, and instead of being horrified, Rhea and Lena were intrigued. They fed into his obsession, encouraged it. They started planning something, though at first, Maribel didn't believe they were serious. But they were serious. Deadly serious. Rhea suggested they choose a victim, someone at the school, someone weak, someone no one would miss. Damon proposed a younger student, a girl named Bethany who was 12 years old and had just arrived at Ironwood. Bethany was shy, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. She trusted people. She wanted friends. She was perfect, according to Rhea. Maribel felt sick listening to them talk. "You don't really mean it," she said. "This is just talk, right? We're not actually going to hurt anyone." Rhea looked at her with cold eyes. "Are you with us or not?" That question hung in the air. Maribel had a choice. She could walk away. She could report what she'd heard. She could do the right thing. But she was terrified. Terrified of being alone. Terrified of Rhea and Damon turning on her. Terrified of going back to being the lonely, isolated girl she'd been before. So instead of walking away, she nodded. "I'm with you," she said, and those 3 words sealed Bethany's fate. They spent weeks planning. They lured Bethany into their group, pretended to be her friends. Bethany, so grateful for the attention, trusted them completely. She didn't see the danger. How could she? She was a child, and they wore the masks of friendship so convincingly. On a Saturday night in November, the 4 of them told Bethany they were going to have a special ceremony in the woods, something secret and exclusive. Bethany was excited. She felt like she was finally part of something. She snuck out of her dormitory after lights out and met them at the edge of the forest. They walked deep into the trees, far from the school, far from anyone who might hear. When they reached a clearing, Rhea turned to Bethany and said, "You trust us, right?" Bethany nodded. "Of course." "Good," Rhea said, and then she nodded at Damon. What happened next was unspeakable. Damon attacked Bethany with a knife he'd stolen from the school's kitchen. He stabbed her repeatedly, with a savagery that shocked even Rhea and Lena, who'd been egging him on. Bethany screamed, but there was no one to hear. She tried to run, but Lena tripped her, held her down while Damon continued his assault. Maribel stood frozen, watching in horror unable to move, unable to speak, unable to stop what was happening. When it was over, Bethany was dead. Her body lay in the clearing, covered in blood. The four of them stood around her, breathing hard, the reality of what they'd done sinking in. Rhea laughed, a high manic sound. "We actually did it," she said. Damon was grinning. Lena looked exhilarated. But Maribel was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done?" she whispered. "They tried to hide the body. They dragged Bethany deeper into the woods and covered her with leaves and branches. They cleaned themselves up as best they could, scrubbing the blood from their hands and clothes. Then they went back to their dormitories, acting like nothing had happened. But Bethany was missed almost immediately. When she didn't show up for breakfast the next morning, staff searched for her. They checked her room, questioned her roommates, scoured the campus. By afternoon, they'd called the police. Search teams were organized. Volunteers from the town came to help. And in the midst of the chaos, Rhea, Damon, Lena, and Maribel tried to act normal, tried to blend in, tried to pretend they weren't the reason Bethany was gone. They failed. Guilt is a heavy burden, and none of them were equipped to carry it. Maribel broke first. 2 days after Bethany's death, a counselor noticed she was acting strangely, withdrawn and terrified. The counselor pulled her aside and asked if she knew anything. Maribel, exhausted and haunted by what she'd witnessed, confessed. She told the counselor everything. Where Bethany's body was, who was involved, what they'd done. The police arrested all four of them that afternoon. Bethany's body was recovered from the woods. The autopsy revealed she'd been stabbed 23 times. The brutality of the crime shocked the community. Ironwood Technical Institute faced lawsuits and public outrage. How had this been allowed to happen? Where were the staff? Why weren't these students being monitored more closely? The four were charged as adults, despite their ages. The prosecution argued that the crime was too heinous, too premeditated, to be treated as juvenile delinquency. The defense attorneys for each of them tried different strategies. Damon's lawyer argued he had a severe personality disorder, that he couldn't distinguish right from wrong. Rhea's lawyer claimed she'd been manipulated by Damon, that she was a victim too. Lena's lawyer painted her as a follower, someone who went along because she feared Rhea. And Maribel's lawyer argued she'd been coerced, that she was terrified and traumatized, that she'd had no real part in the killing. But the evidence told a different story. Text messages between the four of them showed they'd all participated in planning. Forensic evidence placed all of them at the scene, and witnesses testified that in the days after the murder, the four of them had bragged about what they'd done. They'd shown no remorse, only excitement at having gotten away with it, at least temporarily. The trial was brutal. Bethany's parents sat in the courtroom every day, their faces etched with grief. They had to listen to the details of their daughter's death, the pain she'd endured, the fear she must have felt. They had to look at the four people who'd taken her from them, who'd destroyed their family, and see not monsters but teenagers, children themselves, capable of such incomprehensible cruelty. Damon was convicted and sentenced to death. The state he was in still had the death penalty, and the jury decided his crime warranted it. Rhea and Lena were convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Maribel, because she'd confessed and cooperated, received a slightly lighter sentence. Life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She'd be in her mid-40s before she could even hope for release. The psychological evaluations of the four revealed complex, disturbing pictures. Damon showed signs of antisocial personality disorder, a complete lack of empathy or remorse. Rhea had narcissistic traits, a need for control and admiration. Lena had been severely abused as a child, her capacity for empathy blunted by years of trauma. And Maribel, the youngest and most conflicted, was diagnosed with depression and dependent personality disorder. She'd been desperate for acceptance, so desperate that she'd betrayed her own morals, her own humanity, to avoid rejection. But diagnoses don't excuse actions. All four of them made choices. They chose to plan a murder. They chose to lure Bethany into the woods. They chose to take her life. Maribel might have been the least culpable, but she was still culpable. She could have stopped it. She could have told someone. She chose not to, and a 12-year-old girl paid the price. Bethany's parents started a foundation in her name, focused on improving oversight and safety at institutions like Ironwood. They pushed for legislation requiring better staff-to-student ratios, mandatory mental health evaluations, and stricter protocols for monitoring at-risk youth. Their advocacy led to real change, reforms that made places like Ironwood safer, though no amount of reform could bring their daughter back. Maribel, now serving her sentence in a women's prison, has reportedly expressed remorse. She's participated in therapy. She's written letters to Bethany's family, though they've never responded. She said in interviews that she thinks about Bethany every day, that the guilt is unbearable, that she wishes she could go back and make different choices. But wishes don't change the past. Bethany is still dead. Her parents still grieve. And Maribel will spend the majority of her life behind bars, a punishment she acknowledges is deserved. Maribel's story is a cautionary tale about the desperate need to belong, about how that need can override every instinct for self-preservation and morality. It's about how group dynamics can normalize the unthinkable, how charismatic leaders can manipulate vulnerable followers into committing acts they'd never do alone. And it's a reminder that evil doesn't always come from a place of malice. Sometimes it comes from fear, from weakness, from a failure to stand up when it matters most. If you're still with me, I appreciate you being here. If you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told, and your support makes that possible. We're halfway through now. Let's continue. Isabella Cruz had the kind of life most people only dream about. She lived in a penthouse overlooking the ocean in one of the country's most exclusive coastal cities. Her closets were filled with designer clothes. Her wrists glittered with expensive jewelry. She drove luxury cars and attended charity galas where the champagne flowed freely and everyone smiled for the cameras. Her husband, Victor Salazar, was a real estate mogul, one of the wealthiest men in the city. He'd built his empire from scratch, or so the story went. He was charming, powerful, connected. Politicians sought his endorsement. Business leaders courted his investment. He and Isabella were a power couple, the kind featured in glossy magazines, their lives seemingly perfect from the outside. Isabella and Victor had met 15 years earlier, when Isabella was a young marketing executive and Victor was already well on his way to building his fortune. He'd pursued her relentlessly, showering her with attention and gifts. Isabella, flattered and genuinely attracted to him, had fallen hard. They married within a year, a lavish ceremony attended by hundreds of guests, covered by society pages and lifestyle blogs. For the first few years, the marriage was good. Victor was attentive, generous. He encouraged Isabella to quit her job, to focus on being his partner in the social and business world. She became his hostess, his representative at events he couldn't attend, his public face. She was good at it. She had a talent for making people feel welcome, for navigating the complex politics of their social circle. But as the years passed, cracks began to show. Victor traveled constantly for business, often for weeks at a time. When he was home, he was distracted, always on his phone, always working. Isabella felt lonely, like a beautiful accessory rather than a true partner. She tried to talk to him about it, but Victor brushed off her concerns. "You have everything you need," he'd say. "What more could you want?" What Isabella wanted was connection, intimacy, a sense of purpose beyond planning parties and choosing outfits. But Victor didn't understand that, or didn't care. He saw their marriage as a transaction. He provided wealth and status. She provided beauty and social grace. That was the deal, as far as he was concerned. Then Isabella discovered the affairs. The first one she found out about by accident. She'd picked up Victor's phone thinking it was hers, and a text message flashed on the screen. It was explicit, clearly from a lover. Isabella confronted Victor. He denied it at first, then minimized it, then finally admitted it. "It meant nothing," he said. "She means nothing. You're my wife. That's what matters." Isabella was devastated. She considered leaving, but Victor begged her to stay. He promised to end the affair, to be more attentive, to work on their marriage. He bought her a diamond necklace as an apology. Isabella, not ready to give up on 15 years together, agreed to try again. But Victor didn't change. There were more affairs. Multiple women. Some were brief flings. Others lasted months. Isabella found evidence everywhere once she started looking. Hotel receipts. Credit card statements for jewelry she'd never received. Messages deleted but not quite carefully enough. Each time she confronted him, Victor had the same response. It meant nothing. She was overreacting. She should be grateful for the life he'd given her. The financial control was more subtle, but no less insidious. All of their assets were in Victor's name. The penthouse, the cars, the bank accounts, everything. Isabella had an allowance, a generous one by most standards, but it was still an allowance. She couldn't make major purchases without Victor's approval. She couldn't access their investments or their savings. On paper, Isabella was a wealthy woman. In reality, she was financially dependent, trapped by her lack of independent resources. She started feeling sick. At first, she thought it was stress. She was exhausted all the time. She had headaches. She felt nauseous. Her doctor ran tests but couldn't find anything wrong. Maybe it's anxiety, the doctor suggested. Isabella started seeing a therapist who helped her recognize that her marriage was making her ill, that the constant stress and betrayal were taking a physical toll. But it was more than that. Isabella started having episodes where she felt disoriented, dizzy, like the room was spinning. She'd collapse sometimes, wake up on the floor with no memory of falling. Victor seemed concerned, insisted she see specialists. She went through batteries of tests. Neurologists, cardiologists, endocrinologists. No one could explain what was happening to her. Then came the hospitalizations. The first time, Isabella woke up in the middle of the night unable to breathe. She felt like she was dying. Victor called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors stabilized her but couldn't determine the cause. They kept her for observation, ran more tests, released her with a prescription for anxiety medication. It happened again a month later. And then again. Each time, Isabella felt like she was on the verge of death. Each time, doctors were baffled. Her symptoms didn't fit any known condition. They started suggesting it might be psychological, that she was having panic attacks or some form of conversion disorder. Isabella felt like she was going crazy. She began to doubt herself, to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe this was all in her head. Victor was solicitous during these episodes. He'd stay by her bedside at the hospital. He'd hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. He'd hire private nurses to care for her at home. To anyone watching, he seemed like a devoted husband. But when they were alone, when Isabella was at her weakest, Victor would say things that made her blood run cold. "You're so fragile," he'd murmur. "What would you do without me to take care of you?" Isabella's sister, Monica, visited during one of the hospitalizations. Monica had never liked Victor. She thought he was controlling, arrogant, but she'd kept her opinions to herself out of respect for Isabella's choices. Now, seeing her sister so diminished, so sick, Monica couldn't stay quiet. "This isn't right," she said. "You're only sick when you're at home with him. Have you noticed that?" Isabella hadn't noticed, but once Monica said it, she couldn't unsee it. Every hospitalization had happened after she'd been home with Victor. When she stayed at Monica's house for a few days, she felt better. Her symptoms lessened. Her strength returned. It was impossible to ignore the pattern. Monica pushed her to get tested for poisons. "I know it sounds crazy," Monica said, "but humor me, please." Isabella agreed, more to put Monica's mind at ease than because she believed it. But the tests came back positive. Small amounts of arsenic in her blood. Not enough to kill her quickly, but enough to make her sick, to weaken her over time. The doctor who delivered the results was grave. "Someone is poisoning you," he said. "You need to report this to the police immediately." Isabella was in shock. Poisoning. Someone was poisoning her. And the only person with access to her food and drinks was Victor. Her husband. The man she'd spent 15 years with. The man she'd trusted with her life. She called Monica from the hospital. "You were right," she said, her voice hollow. "It's him. Victor is poisoning me." Monica came immediately. She helped Isabella contact the police. But building a case was complicated. Isabella had no direct proof that Victor was the one administering the poison. He could claim someone else had access to their home, that he was as much a victim as she was. The police advised her to leave, to get somewhere safe, while they investigated. Isabella moved in with Monica. She filed for divorce. She got a lawyer who specialized in cases involving domestic violence and financial abuse. She started documenting everything, every affair, every instance of control, every hospitalization. She was building a case not just for divorce, but for attempted murder. Victor was furious. He called her repeatedly, alternating between pleading and threatening. When she stopped answering, he showed up at Monica's house. Monica called the police, and Victor was issued a restraining order. But restraining orders, as Elena Ward's story proved, are only as good as their enforcement. The investigation into the poisoning revealed disturbing details. Victor had purchased arsenic online, using a fake account. He'd been putting small amounts in Isabella's food and drinks for months, possibly longer. The goal, investigators believed, was to make her so sick that she'd die of what appeared to be natural causes, or that she'd be committed to a psychiatric facility, removing her as an obstacle to his plans. Because Victor had plans, financial investigators looking into his business dealings discovered massive fraud. Victor's real estate empire was built on a foundation of lies. He'd inflated property values, misled investors, engaged in money laundering. He was millions of dollars in debt, on the verge of financial ruin. Isabella, as his wife, would have been entitled to half of their assets in a divorce. But if she were dead or incapacitated, Victor would maintain control. The poisoning wasn't about hatred or passion. It was about money. Victor saw Isabella not as a person, but as a financial liability, and he decided to eliminate her. The case against Victor grew stronger. Prosecutors charged him with attempted murder, fraud, and a litany of other crimes. But before he could be arrested, Victor made one last desperate move. He set fire to the penthouse they'd shared, trying to destroy evidence. The fire department responded quickly, putting out the blaze before it spread to other units. But the penthouse was destroyed, along with whatever evidence Victor had hoped to eliminate. Victor was arrested at the scene. He tried to claim the fire was an accident, but accelerants were found throughout the apartment. He'd planned it, just as he'd planned everything else. But this time, his plan had failed. The trial was sensational. The media couldn't get enough of it. Millionaire husband tried to murder wife for money. The headlines screamed. Isabella testified, recounting the years of affairs, the financial control, the mysterious illnesses. Medical experts testified about the arsenic poisoning. Forensic accountants laid out Victor's fraudulent business dealings. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor's defense team tried to paint Isabella as a gold digger, someone who'd married him for money and was now trying to destroy him out of spite. But the jury didn't buy it. The evidence of poisoning was irrefutable. The evidence of fraud was irrefutable. Victor Salazar was a man who'd tried to kill his wife to protect his wealth, and he was going to pay for it. But before the verdict was read, Victor made a final, dramatic move. He was found dead in his cell, having taken his own life. He left no note, no explanation. He simply checked out, leaving behind chaos and unanswered questions. Isabella was left to pick up the pieces. The penthouse was gone. Victor's assets were seized to pay back investors he'd defrauded. She was left with almost nothing, financially. But she was alive. She'd survived, and that was more than many women in her situation could say. She moved forward slowly, rebuilding her life. She went back to school, earned a degree in psychology. She became an advocate for women in abusive relationships, particularly those involving financial control. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, shared her story to help others recognize the warning signs. Isabella's story is a reminder that abuse doesn't always look like bruises and broken bones. Sometimes it looks like a luxury penthouse and a diamond necklace. Sometimes it's hidden behind wealth and status, making it harder to recognize and harder to escape. Financial control is a form of abuse, and when combined with other forms of manipulation, it can be deadly. Victor Salazar was a man who had everything, but it wasn't enough. He wanted total control, and when that control was threatened, he was willing to kill to maintain it. He saw his wife as property, an asset to be managed or disposed of as he saw fit. And in the end, he destroyed himself rather than face the consequences of his actions. Isabella could have been another statistic, another woman killed by her intimate partner. But she had a sister who asked questions, who refused to accept easy answers. She had doctors who listened. She had the resources to get tested, to get help. Not every woman in her situation is so fortunate. Many suffer in silence, their illnesses attributed to stress or mental health issues, while their partners slowly poison them in plain sight. Financial abuse is often the hardest form to recognize and escape. When you have no money of your own, no independent resources, leaving seems impossible. Where do you go? How do you survive? These are the questions that keep women trapped, even when they know they're in danger. Isabella was lucky. She had family support, but not everyone does. And that's why her story, difficult as it is to hear, needs to be told. Because somewhere, right now, another woman is experiencing the same thing. And maybe, if she hears Isabella's story, she'll recognize the signs. She'll get help. She'll survive. Ethan Rowe had a vision. It consumed him, drove him, defined every waking moment of his life. He wanted to change the world, or at least that's what he told people. He wanted to create a new way of working, a new kind of community, a space where creativity and collaboration thrived. He called his company Unity Spaces, and for a few brief, glorious years, it looked like he might actually succeed. Unity Spaces started as a simple idea, co-working spaces designed to feel less like offices and more like communities. Ethan, a former tech entrepreneur who'd sold his first startup for a modest sum, envisioned beautiful, thoughtfully designed spaces where freelancers, artists, small business owners, and remote workers could come together. But it was more than just renting desks. Ethan promised a philosophy, a lifestyle, a movement. The first Unity space opened in a converted warehouse in a trendy neighborhood. It was gorgeous. Exposed brick walls, artisanal coffee bar, plants everywhere, inspirational quotes painted on the walls. Members didn't just rent desks, they bought into a vision. They attended workshops, networking events, wellness seminars. They formed friendships, collaborated on projects, felt like they were part of something bigger than themselves. Ethan was the face of it all. He was charismatic, passionate, endlessly energetic. He'd walk through the space every day, greeting members by name, asking about their projects, offering encouragement. He had this way of making everyone feel seen, valued, important. People loved him. They believed in him. And when Ethan announced plans to expand, to open Unity spaces in cities across the country, members were thrilled. They wanted to be part of this growth, this revolution. That's when Ethan met Mara. She was a wellness coach, all flowing scarves and crystals, and talk about energy and manifestation. Ethan was immediately smitten. Mara had this intensity, this conviction in her beliefs that matched his own conviction about Unity spaces. They started dating, and within months, Mara was deeply involved in the company. She introduced spiritual practices into the workplace, morning meditation sessions, sound baths, workshops on manifesting abundance. Some members loved it. Others found it strange, but went along because they trusted Ethan. A few were uncomfortable, felt like the company was veering into cult-like territory. But they kept their concerns to themselves. Who were they to question the vision? Ethan and Mara clearly knew what they were doing. Except they didn't. Behind the scenes, Unity Spaces was hemorrhaging money. The beautiful spaces were expensive to maintain. The events and workshops, while popular, didn't generate significant revenue. Ethan was spending lavishly, convinced that investment in aesthetics and culture would pay off in the long run. He took out loans, brought in investors, promising returns that were wildly optimistic. Employees started noticing red flags. Paychecks were late. Vendors weren't being paid. When staff raised concerns, Ethan would dismiss them with vague reassurances. "Trust the process," he'd say. "We're building something revolutionary. Growing pains are normal." Mara, meanwhile, was becoming more influential. She started conducting one-on-one sessions with employees, ostensibly to help them with stress and work-life balance. But these sessions felt more like interrogations. She'd ask probing personal questions. She'd assess their commitment to the Unity Spaces mission. Employees who expressed doubts or concerns were labeled as having negative energy and were ostracized. A culture of fear developed. Employees worked insane hours, afraid of being seen as uncommitted. They attended mandatory wellness sessions even when they didn't want to. They participated in increasingly bizarre team-building exercises, like trust falls from dangerous heights, and group therapy sessions where they were encouraged to share their deepest traumas with coworkers. Anyone who pushed back was made to feel like a traitor. One employee, a woman named Sarah Chun who'd been with Unity Spaces from the beginning, finally spoke up. She sent an email to Ethan outlining her concerns: the financial instability, the inappropriate personal boundary violations, the way Mara seemed to be manipulating staff. She urged Ethan to course-correct before things got worse. Ethan's response was swift and brutal. Sarah was fired. Not just fired, but publicly shamed. Ethan called an all-hands meeting and announced that Sarah had been terminated for spreading negativity and sabotaging the team's energy. He didn't name her directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. The message was clear: dissent would not be tolerated. Sarah wasn't the only one to leave. Over the next months, several employees quit, burned out and disillusioned. But for every person who left, there were others who stayed, who believed in the vision so deeply that they couldn't see what was happening. They doubled down on their commitment, worked even harder, convinced that success was just around the corner if they could just push through. Unity Spaces continued to expand, but the expansion was reckless. Ethan opened new locations faster than the company could sustain. Each new space required significant upfront investment, and revenue wasn't keeping pace. Investors were getting nervous. They'd poured millions into the company based on Ethan's promises, and they wanted to see returns. Ethan kept assuring them that Unity Spaces was on the verge of profitability, that they just needed to scale a bit more. He started fudging numbers. Not outright lying, he told himself, just presenting data in the most optimistic light possible. Occupancy rates were inflated. Projected revenues were wildly unrealistic. He convinced investors to put in more money, promising that the next round of funding would take them to an initial public offering. The IPO, he claimed, would make everyone rich. But the IPO never happened. When Unity Spaces' financial statements were audited in preparation for going public, the truth came out. The company was deeply in debt. Occupancy rates were far lower than reported. Revenue projections were fantasy. The business model, beautiful as it sounded, was fundamentally unsustainable. Investors were furious. They'd been misled, and they wanted answers. Lawsuits were filed. Criminal investigations were launched. Ethan and Mara, facing potential fraud charges, lawyered up. They maintained they'd done nothing wrong, that they'd simply been optimistic entrepreneurs caught in unfortunate circumstances. Meanwhile, Unity Spaces collapsed. Locations closed overnight. Members showed up to locked doors, their deposits non-refundable. Employees were laid off en masse, many of them never receiving their final paychecks. People who'd believed in the vision, who'd invested not just money but their time, their energy, their trust, were left with nothing. The human cost was staggering. Former employees spoke out about the toxic culture, the way they'd been manipulated and exploited. Some had developed anxiety and depression from the constant pressure. Others had neglected their families and personal lives, convinced that their work at Unity Spaces was the most important thing they could be doing. They'd sacrificed everything for a vision that turned out to be smoke and mirrors. Ethan and Mara, however, landed on their feet. They'd paid themselves generous salaries throughout, even as the company struggled. They'd taken out loans using company assets as collateral, personally profiting while employees went unpaid. By the time Unity Spaces officially declared bankruptcy, Ethan and Mara had already moved on. They started a new venture, a consulting business helping other companies build authentic workplace cultures. The audacity was breathtaking. Some former employees tried to hold them accountable. They shared their stories publicly, hoping to warn others. They cooperated with investigators, hoping for criminal charges. But fraud is notoriously difficult to prove, especially when the perpetrators can claim they genuinely believe their own hype. Ethan maintained he'd done his best, that the failure was due to market conditions beyond his control. Some people believed him. Others saw through it, but felt powerless to do anything. The legal fallout dragged on for years. Some investors recouped a fraction of their losses through settlements. Most got nothing. Employees who'd been owed wages filed claims, but there was little money left to distribute. Ethan and Mara faced civil suits, but no criminal charges. They settled out of court, admitting no wrongdoing, and moved on with their lives. Unity Spaces became a cautionary tale in business schools and entrepreneurship circles. It was a lesson in what happens when vision without integrity meets unchecked ambition. Ethan had wanted to build something meaningful, or at least he claimed to. But somewhere along the way, the vision became about ego, about being seen as a visionary, about the rush of adulation and the intoxicating feeling of being believed in. Mara's influence had accelerated the descent into dysfunction, but the seeds were there from the beginning. Ethan had surrounded himself with people who agreed with him, who reinforced his belief in his own brilliance. He'd dismissed critics as negative or uncommitted. He'd prioritized optics over substance, creating beautiful spaces and compelling narratives while ignoring basic business fundamentals. He'd convinced himself that the rules didn't apply to him, that passion and vision were enough. And the people who paid the price were the ones who believed him, the employees who worked themselves to exhaustion, the members who trusted their deposits and memberships to a company that couldn't deliver. the investors who lost their savings. They'd all bought into Ethan's vision, and that vision had consumed them, leaving them with nothing but disillusionment and debt. Years later, some former Unity Spaces employees formed a support group. They met monthly, sharing their experiences, helping each other heal from what they'd been through. They talked about the warning signs they'd ignored, the red flags they'd rationalized. They supported each other in rebuilding their careers and their confidence. And they made a pact. They'd never again let charisma and vision blind them to fundamental questions of ethics, sustainability, and accountability. One former employee, a graphic designer named Marcus, put it this way: "I wanted so badly to be part of something special that I ignored my own instincts. Every time something felt wrong, I told myself I was just being cynical, that I needed to trust the process. But there was no process. There was just Ethan's ego and Mara's manipulation, and by the time I realized it, I'd wasted 2 years of my life." Another, a woman named Jasmine who'd been an operations manager, said, "The worst part wasn't losing my job or my paycheck. It was realizing I'd been complicit. I'd enforced policies I knew were wrong. I'd dismissed employees' concerns because I wanted to believe we were doing something revolutionary. I have to live with that. I have to live with the fact that I let my desire to belong override my ethics." Their stories, painful as they were to tell, served a purpose. They warned others about the dangers of cult-like corporate cultures, about the importance of maintaining boundaries and questioning authority. They reminded people that a compelling vision isn't enough. Execution matters. Ethics matter. Treating people with dignity matters. And when those things are missing, no amount of inspirational quotes on the walls can make up for it. Ethan Rowe's story is different from the others you've heard tonight. No one died. There was no physical violence. But there was harm, real and lasting harm. People's careers were derailed. Their mental health suffered. Their trust in others and in themselves was shattered. They gave their time, their talent, their belief to someone who exploited it for his own gain. And Ethan, like so many charismatic con artists, walked away largely unscathed. He rebranded. He told a new story, one where he was a victim of circumstances, a dreamer whose ideas were ahead of their time. Some people bought it. And somewhere, right now, he's likely building another vision, attracting new believers, setting the stage for the next collapse. That's the thing about stories like Ethan's. They don't end with accountability. They end with the perpetrator moving on while the victims are left to heal. It's not satisfying. It's not justice. But it's reality for too many people who fall prey to charismatic leaders promising transformation and delivering destruction. These 5 stories, as different as they are on the surface, share common threads. They're stories about control, about the ways people in power, whether that power comes from physical strength, wealth, charisma, or authority, exploit those with less power. They're stories about warning signs that were visible but ignored, either by the victims themselves who wanted to believe things would get better, or by bystanders who didn't want to get involved. Elena Ward's story shows us that leaving an abusive relationship isn't the end of the danger. It's often when the danger peaks. Abusers don't accept rejection. They don't respect boundaries. For them, their partner's autonomy is a threat that must be eliminated. Elena did everything right. She left. She filed for protection. She reported violations. But the system failed her. The police didn't take the threat seriously enough. The protection order was just paper. And Elena paid with her life. Her story raises uncomfortable questions. How many women are living Elena's story right now? How many have left abusive partners and are being stalked, threatened, harassed, while authorities tell them to just be careful? How many protection orders are being violated without consequence? The answer is too many. Far too many. Lydia Monroe's story is about vulnerability and predation. She was a bright, capable young woman who made a choice that millions of people make every night. She got into a car she thought was safe. The difference was that Caleb Royce was hunting. He'd identified a vulnerability in the rideshare system and exploited it with devastating efficiency. Lydia wasn't reckless. She wasn't foolish. She was simply unlucky enough to cross paths with a predator at the exact wrong moment. Her story changed behaviors. It changed technology. It made people more cautious. But it also serves as a reminder that evil doesn't announce itself. Caleb looked normal. He sounded normal. There was no way for Lydia to know, in those crucial seconds when she made the decision to get in his car, that he wasn't who he claimed to be. We ask women to be vigilant. to trust their instincts, to stay safe. But when predators are skilled at deception, when they're practiced at appearing normal, how can anyone truly protect themselves? Maribel Knox's story is perhaps the most complicated because it forces us to confront the question of youth and culpability. She was 15, desperate to belong, terrified of being alone. She made choices that led to a child's death, choices she claims to regret every day. But does regret erase responsibility? Does youth excuse participation in murder? The truth is messy. Maribel was a victim of her own desperation, manipulated by older, more dominant personalities. But she was also a perpetrator. She could have walked away. She could have reported the plan. She chose not to, and Bethany paid the price. The courts decided Maribel was culpable, but less so than the others. Hence the possibility of parole. Society will eventually have to decide if she's redeemed, if decades in prison have atoned for what she helped do to a 12-year-old girl. What her story teaches us is that the need to belong can be weaponized. Young people, especially those who are vulnerable and isolated, will sometimes do anything to avoid rejection. They'll compromise their values. They'll ignore their instincts. They'll participate in things they know are wrong because being alone feels worse than being complicit. It's a truth that predators understand and exploit. Rhea, Damon, and Lena knew exactly what they were doing when they targeted Maribel, when they made her feel special, included, essential to their group. They bound her to them through shared transgression, making her an accomplice before she fully understood what she'd become. Isabella Cruz's story exposes the lie that wealth equals safety. She had everything, materially speaking. A beautiful home, financial security, social status, but none of it protected her from the man who was supposed to love her. Victor saw her as an asset, something he owned. When she became a liability, he tried to eliminate her with the cold calculation of someone closing a bad investment. Her story also highlights how insidious financial abuse can be. Isabella wasn't locked in a basement. She wasn't obviously controlled. She could go shopping, have lunch with friends, live what looked like a luxurious life. But she had no independent access to money. She couldn't make financial decisions. She was entirely dependent on Victor's goodwill, and when that goodwill evaporated, she had nothing. Financial abuse traps victims as effectively as physical violence, sometimes more so. Because when you have no money, when you have no credit in your own name, when you have no bank account that isn't monitored, leaving becomes nearly impossible. Where do you go? How do you pay for a lawyer? How do you feed yourself? These practical questions keep people trapped, even when they know they're in danger. Isabella survived because she had family support and because she got lucky with a doctor who ran the right tests. But many women in her situation don't survive. They die of mysterious illnesses that no one thinks to investigate. They're gaslit into believing they're mentally unstable. They're slowly poisoned or driven to suicide, and their deaths are ruled natural or self-inflicted. The truth dies with them. And then there's Ethan Rowe, whose story of corporate manipulation and cult-like culture might seem less serious because no one died. But the harm was real. The psychological damage to employees was real. The financial losses to investors were real. The wasted years, the broken trust, the lingering trauma, all of it was real and lasting. Ethan's story is a reminder that abuse of power doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like inspiration. Sometimes it's wrapped in vision and passion and beautiful aesthetics. Sometimes the abuser genuinely believes they're doing good, that the ends justify the means, that their vision is so important that a few casualties along the way are acceptable. Corporate cults are more common than people realize. They start with a charismatic leader and a compelling vision. They create an us versus them mentality, where loyalty to the company is the highest value. They exploit people's desire for meaning and community, for being part of something larger than themselves. And they burn people out, chew them up, spit them out when they're no longer useful. What makes Ethan's story particularly galling is that he faced no real consequences. He didn't go to prison. He didn't lose everything. He rebranded and moved on, ready to attract the next group of believers. And that's a reality we have to grapple with. Not all abusers face justice. Not all perpetrators pay for what they've done. Sometimes they just get away with it, leaving their victims to heal while they move on to new opportunities. These 5 stories span different contexts, different forms of abuse, different outcomes. But they all come back to the same fundamental issue: power imbalances and the ways they can be exploited. Elena was physically weaker than Marcus and financially dependent on him. Lydia was alone and vulnerable when Caleb found her. Maribel was young and desperate for belonging. Isabella was financially controlled and isolated. Unity Space's employees were dependent on their jobs and invested in a vision they wanted to believe in. In each case, someone with power recognized someone else's vulnerability and exploited it. And in each case, there were warning signs. Marcus showed jealousy and possessiveness early on. Caleb had a history of watching women outside bars. Rhea, Damon, and Lena escalated their behavior gradually, testing boundaries. Victor's affairs and financial secrecy were red flags Isabella rationalized. Ethan's dismissal of criticism and Mara's boundary violations should have been deal breakers for employees. But warning signs are only useful if someone is paying attention and willing to act on what they see. Elena's friends noticed changes but didn't push hard enough. Lydia's verification of the car was rushed and incomplete. Maribel saw the escalation but chose belonging over safety. Isabella's doctors initially missed the poisoning. Unity Space's employees who saw problems convinced themselves they were wrong. We need to be better at recognizing these patterns. We need to be better at listening when someone tells us something feels wrong. We need to be better at intervening, even when it's uncomfortable, even when we're not sure. Because silence enables abuse. Inaction allows it to continue. And by the time the damage is undeniable, it's often too late. So what do we do with these stories? How do we honor the memories of Elena and Lydia and Bethany? How do we support survivors like Isabella and the former Unity Spaces employees? How do we reckon with complicated cases like Maribel's? We start by believing victims. When someone says they're afraid, we don't minimize it. When someone says they're being controlled, we don't tell them they're overreacting. When someone says something feels wrong, we listen. We take it seriously. We help them find resources and support. We educate ourselves about the signs of abuse in all its forms: physical, emotional, financial, psychological. We learn what coercive control looks like, what love bombing is, what gaslighting means. We understand that abuse often escalates gradually, that perpetrators are skilled at making their behavior seem normal or justified. We recognize that anyone can be a victim, regardless of age, gender, wealth, or education. We hold systems accountable. We demand that police take protection orders seriously, that violations result in immediate consequences. We push for better laws, better enforcement, better support for survivors. We vote for prosecutors who prioritize domestic violence cases. We support organizations that provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to victims. We also need to stop glorifying charismatic leaders without demanding accountability. We need to question visions that require sacrificing people's well-being. We need to be skeptical of anyone who dismisses criticism as negativity or who demands unconditional loyalty. Healthy organizations, healthy relationships, healthy communities allow for dissent. They encourage questions. They value people's autonomy and dignity. And we need to be willing to intervene, even when it's uncomfortable. If you see a friend in a controlling relationship, say something. If you witness harassment or assault, don't look away. If your workplace culture is toxic, speak up or leave and warn others. Yes, there are risks to intervention, but there are greater risks to silence. None of these stories had to end the way they did. Elena could have been protected if the system had taken Marcus seriously. Lydia could have lived if better verification systems had been in place. Bethany could have been saved if Maribel had told someone about the plan. Isabella could have died if Monica hadn't pushed for testing. Unity Space's employees could have been spared years of exploitation if early whistleblowers had been heard. But these things didn't happen, and so people died or were traumatized or lost years of their lives to abuse. Their stories are painful to hear because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the world we live in, about the ways systems fail, about the ways we fail each other, about the ways we fail ourselves when we ignore our instincts or rationalize away red flags. These stories are not meant to make you paranoid or cynical. They're meant to make you aware, vigilant, prepared. They're meant to help you recognize patterns that might save your life or someone else's. They're meant to remind you that abuse thrives in silence and dies in awareness. If you're in a situation that resembles any of these stories, please reach out for help. There are resources available. hotlines, shelters, legal aid organizations, therapists who specialize in trauma. You don't have to face this alone. You don't have to stay in a dangerous situation because you feel trapped. There are people who will help you, who will believe you, who will support you as you find your way to safety. And if someone you know is in danger, don't stay silent. Offer support. Provide resources. Be there for them. Understand that leaving is complicated and dangerous, that victims often return to their abusers multiple times before they manage to get out for good. Don't judge. Don't give ultimatums. Just be a consistent, supportive presence. Let's talk more specifically about the patterns we see across these stories, because understanding these patterns is how we protect ourselves and others. These aren't just individual tragedies. They're manifestations of broader systemic failures and societal issues that we need to address. The first pattern is isolation. Marcus systematically isolated Elena from her friends and family. He monitored her communications, questioned her activities, made her feel guilty for spending time with anyone else. By the time Elena realized she needed help, her support network had eroded. The people who might have helped her didn't know how bad things had gotten because Marcus had cut them off. This is textbook abuser behavior. Isolation serves multiple purposes. It eliminates external perspectives that might help the victim recognize the abuse. It removes potential sources of help when the victim tries to leave. It makes the victim more dependent on the abuser for social connection and validation. And it ensures that the abuse happens in private, where there are no witnesses, no accountability. If you notice a friend or family member becoming increasingly isolated, especially if it coincides with a new relationship or job, that's a red flag. Reach out. Keep reaching out, even if they push you away. Let them know you're there, that they can come to you if they need help. Don't give up on them. The second pattern is escalation. None of these situations started at their worst. Marcus didn't immediately push Elena into walls. He started with jealousy, then monitoring, then criticism, gradually increasing his control until physical violence seemed like a natural progression. Rhea, Damon, and Lena didn't start by planning murder. They started with small acts of rebellion, escalating to vandalism, then to increasingly disturbing rituals, building up to the ultimate transgression. Abusers and predators test boundaries. They push a little, see what they can get away with, then push a little more. Each boundary crossed becomes the new normal, and the victim adjusts their expectations downward. What would have been unthinkable at the beginning becomes tolerable through this gradual process. Understanding escalation means taking early warning signs seriously. That first instance of jealousy, that first time someone monitors your phone, that first uncomfortable request from a boss or leader, those aren't isolated incidents. They're data points indicating a pattern. And patterns, once established, tend to continue unless something disrupts them. The third pattern is rationalization. Every victim in these stories rationalized red flags at some point. Elena told herself Marcus was just protective. Lydia didn't verify the car carefully because she was tired and wanted to get home. Maribel convinced herself that Rhea's group wouldn't really go through with their plans. Isabella excused Victor's affairs and control as normal for powerful men. Unity Space's employees dismissed concerns about the company culture because they believed in the vision. We all rationalize. It's a natural human tendency. We want to believe the best about people. We want to trust. We want to avoid conflict. We want to believe that our investments of time, emotion, and resources weren't mistakes. So we make excuses. We minimize. We reframe concerning behavior as understandable or justified. But rationalization, while psychologically protective in the short term, can be deadly in the long term. It keeps us in dangerous situations longer than we should be. It prevents us from taking protective action. It allows abuse to continue and escalate. The antidote to rationalization is listening to your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, even if you can't articulate exactly why. Your instincts are picking up on cues that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed. Trust them. Don't talk yourself out of discomfort. Don't let others talk you out of it either. The fourth pattern is systemic failure. In multiple stories, institutions that should have protected victims failed. The police didn't enforce Elena's protection order adequately. Ironwood Technical Institute didn't properly supervise vulnerable students. The financial system allowed Victor to defraud investors. Corporate culture allowed Ethan to exploit employees. These aren't just individual failures. They're systemic ones. They reflect deeper issues: underfunded domestic violence programs, overworked police who don't prioritize domestic calls, insufficient oversight of institutions caring for at-risk youth, lax financial regulations, and cultural attitudes that prioritize corporate success over employee well-being. Fixing these systemic failures requires collective action. It requires voting for policies and politicians who prioritize victim protection. It requires funding for social services. It requires regulatory oversight. It requires cultural shifts in how we think about work, success, and loyalty. These are big, complicated problems without easy solutions. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to solve them. The fifth pattern is the ordinariness of perpetrators. Marcus wasn't a monster in appearance. He was charming, at least initially. Caleb was unremarkable, someone you wouldn't notice in a crowd. Ria was charismatic and magnetic. Victor was successful and respected. Ethan was visionary and inspiring. None of them looked like villains. They looked like normal people. This is perhaps the most unsettling pattern because it means we can't identify predators by appearance or initial presentation. Evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a sign. It looks like everyone else, talks like everyone else, and often says exactly what we want to hear. The implication is that we can't rely on our initial impressions. We have to pay attention to behavior over time. We have to watch how someone treats others, especially those with less power. We have to notice inconsistencies between words and actions. We have to be willing to update our assessments when new information emerges. A sixth pattern is the role of bystanders. In several of these stories, people knew something was wrong, but didn't act. Elena's friends noticed changes, but didn't push hard enough. Students at Ironwood saw Maribel's group engaging in disturbing behavior, but didn't report it. Unity Space's employees who recognized the toxic culture often stayed silent, afraid of being labeled negative or being fired like Sarah. The bystander effect is real and well documented. When we see something concerning, we often assume someone else will handle it. We don't want to make a scene. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to face the social consequences of speaking up. So we stay silent, and that silence enables harm. We need to normalize intervention. We need to make it socially acceptable, even expected, to say something when we see concerning behavior. Yes, sometimes we'll be wrong. Sometimes our concerns will turn out to be unfounded. But the cost of being wrong is embarrassment. The cost of being right and staying silent is someone's safety, possibly their life. If you see something, say something. Report suspicious behavior to appropriate authorities. Check in with people who seem to be in distress. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Be the someone who handles it. A seventh pattern is the exploitation of legitimate needs. Every victim had legitimate needs that were exploited. Elena needed love and partnership. Lydia needed transportation home. Maribel needed belonging and acceptance. Isabella needed security and companionship. Unity Space's employees needed meaningful work and community. Perpetrators identified these needs and positioned themselves as the solution, then used that position to exploit and control. This is important to understand because it means that being targeted, being victimized, doesn't reflect any deficiency in the victim. You weren't stupid or weak or naive. You had normal human needs, and someone exploited those needs. That's on them, not you. But understanding this pattern can also help us be more cautious. When someone seems to be offering exactly what we need, when something seems too good to be true, it's worth slowing down and evaluating carefully. Legitimate helpers don't rush you. They don't isolate you. They don't make you feel obligated. They respect boundaries and support your autonomy. If someone is pushing for rapid intimacy, making you feel like they're the only one who understands you, creating a sense that you owe them, those are warning signs. Good relationships, whether romantic, professional, or communal, develop gradually. They allow for independence. They encourage you to maintain other connections. They don't demand exclusivity or absolute loyalty. An eighth pattern is the aftermath of trauma. Even in stories where victims survived, the trauma they experienced had lasting effects. Isabella deals with trust issues and PTSD. Former Unity Space's employees struggle with confidence and cynicism. Families of victims like Elena and Lydia live with grief that never fully heals. Even Maribel, perpetrator though she was, carries trauma from what she participated in. Trauma isn't something you just get over. It changes you. It affects how you see the world, how you relate to others, how you feel in your own skin. Healing is possible, but it's a long process that requires support, often professional support. If you've experienced abuse or violence, please seek help. Therapy, support groups, trauma-informed care, these things can make a real difference. You don't have to carry this alone. You don't have to pretend you're fine when you're not. Healing isn't weakness. It's courage. And for those supporting survivors, understand that healing isn't linear. There will be good days and bad days. There will be setbacks. Be patient. Be consistent. Don't pressure them to be over it or to move on faster than they're able. Your role is to be a safe, stable presence as they do the hard work of recovery. A ninth pattern, particularly relevant in Elena's and Isabella's cases, is the danger of leaving. The most dangerous time for a victim of intimate partner violence is when they leave or attempt to leave. That's when abusers, feeling their control slipping, often escalate to lethal violence. Elena was killed after leaving Marcus. Isabella was poisoned after Victor sensed she might leave. This is why we can't just tell people to leave abusive situations without also providing support and resources. Leaving requires planning. It requires resources. It requires a safety net. Just telling someone to leave is not only unhelpful, it can be dangerous if they leave without adequate preparation. If you're planning to leave an abusive situation, do so carefully. Reach out to domestic violence organizations that can help you create a safety plan. Save money if possible. Document abuse. Keep important documents secure. Have a place to go where your abuser doesn't know about. Tell trusted people what's happening so they can support you. And understand that you may need to leave multiple times before it sticks. Research shows that victims of domestic violence leave an average of 7 times before leaving permanently. Each time you leave and return, you're not failing. You're gathering information, building resources, strengthening your resolve. Eventually, you'll make it out. Don't give up. A 10th pattern is the manipulation of language and framing. Marcus called his jealousy protection. Victor called his control looking out for Isabella's best interests. Ethan called exploitation commitment to the vision. Perpetrators are skilled at reframing their behavior in positive terms, making it harder for victims to name what's happening as abuse. This is why education about abuse is so important. When you know the terminology, when you understand what gaslighting, love bombing, and financial abuse actually mean, you're better equipped to recognize them when they happen. You can't address a problem you don't have words for. Learn the language of abuse. Teach it to young people. Talk about it openly so it loses its power. The more we normalize these conversations, the easier it becomes for victims to identify what's happening and ask for help. An 11th pattern is the way trauma affects decision-making. Maribel's background of depression and anxiety made her more vulnerable to manipulation. The chronic stress of Elena's relationship affected her judgment. Isabella's ongoing poisoning caused cognitive impairment. Trauma and stress literally change how our brains function, making it harder to think clearly, assess risk accurately, or take protective action. This is why victim blaming is so harmful and inaccurate. Why didn't she just leave? Why didn't he report it? How could they not see what was happening? These questions ignore the reality that trauma impairs the exact cognitive functions needed to escape traumatic situations. It's like asking someone with a broken leg why they don't just run away from danger. If you're in a situation where you feel like you can't think clearly, like you're in a fog, that's a sign that you need help. Reach out to someone you trust. Explain what you're experiencing. Let them help you think through options. Sometimes an outside perspective can cut through the confusion that trauma creates. A 12th pattern worth examining is how society's response to these crimes reflects broader values and biases. When Elena was killed, there was brief outrage, but it quickly faded. Domestic violence wasn't seen as a priority. When Lydia was murdered, there was extensive media coverage, but much of it focused on what she could have done differently rather than on Caleb's predatory behavior. When Bethany was killed, the focus was on the troubled teens who did it rather than on the institutional failures that allowed it to happen. When Isabella survived attempted murder, some people suggested she should have known better than to marry someone like Victor. When Unity Spaces collapsed, many people blamed the employees for being naive rather than Ethan for exploiting them. We have a tendency as a society to blame victims and excuse perpetrators. We do this partly because it's psychologically comforting. If victims made mistakes, if they could have done something differently, then we can believe we're safe because we wouldn't make those mistakes. It gives us an illusion of control over our own safety. But it's a false comfort, and it comes at the cost of failing to hold perpetrators accountable and failing to fix the systems that enable them. Real safety comes not from victim blaming, but from perpetrator accountability and systemic reform. It comes from taking threats seriously. It comes from enforcing consequences for abuse. It comes from creating robust support systems for people trying to escape dangerous situations. It comes from cultural shifts that reject control and coercion in all their forms. Think about how often we hear about cases like these. Another woman killed by her ex-partner. Another student assaulted. Another elderly person financially exploited. Another company exposed for toxic workplace culture. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of broader problems that we've failed to adequately address. And every time we blame victims, we reinforce the conditions that allow these problems to persist. A 13th pattern is the intergenerational impact of violence and abuse. Elena's children will grow up without their mother, raised by their grandmother, who is also grieving. They'll carry trauma from what they witnessed, from what they lost. Lydia's younger sister had to navigate young adulthood without the older sister she idolized. Bethany's parents will never recover from their loss. Isabella, even though she survived, may struggle to trust in future relationships. Former Unity Spaces employees may approach future jobs with cynicism and mistrust. Trauma ripples outward. It affects not just the direct victim, but everyone connected to them. Children, parents, siblings, friends, they all carry pieces of the trauma. And sometimes that trauma manifests in destructive ways. Children who witness domestic violence are more likely to become victims or perpetrators themselves, not because of anything inherent to them, but because violence becomes their model for relationships. People who've been exploited may struggle to set healthy boundaries in the future, either becoming too cautious or too permissive. Breaking these cycles requires conscious effort. It requires therapy. It requires learning new patterns. It requires communities that support healing rather than stigmatizing trauma. We need to recognize that investing in trauma recovery isn't just about individuals. It's about preventing future harm, about breaking cycles that otherwise perpetuate across generations. A 14th pattern is the way justice often fails to bring closure. Marcus is in prison for life, but Elena is still dead. Caleb will never be free, but that doesn't bring Lydia back. Rhea, Damon, and Lena are behind bars, but Bethany remains murdered. Victor took his own life before facing full accountability. Ethan and Mara face civil suits, but no criminal charges. In most of these cases, the punishment, even when it came, felt inadequate compared to the harm caused. This is something we need to be honest about. Our justice system isn't designed to heal trauma or restore what was lost. It's designed to punish wrongdoing and deter future crimes. Sometimes it succeeds. Often it doesn't. And even when it does, it can't undo what happened. It can't bring back the dead. It can't erase trauma. It can't restore years lost to abuse or exploitation. So what do we do with this reality? We work toward accountability while also investing in healing. We support survivors in their recovery regardless of whether legal justice is achieved. We create communities where safety and well-being are prioritized, not as responses to crime, but as proactive values. We recognize that legal consequences are only one piece of a much larger puzzle. And we tell stories. We bear witness to what happened. We say the names of victims. We document perpetrators' crimes. We create a record that says this happened, these people mattered, and we will not forget them. There's power in testimony, in refusing to let these stories be buried or forgotten. That's part of why this video exists, why it's important to sit with these difficult truths even when they're uncomfortable. A 15th pattern is resilience and the capacity for recovery. Despite everything, some people in these stories found ways to move forward. Elena's children are being raised by a grandmother who loves them, in a community that supports them. Lydia's parents channeled grief into advocacy that has saved other lives. Isabella rebuilt after losing nearly everything. Former Unity Spaces employees formed support networks and learned to trust again. Even Maribel, in prison, has done therapy and expressed genuine remorse. Human resilience is remarkable. People survive things that should break them. They find ways to create meaning from tragedy. They turn pain into purpose. They heal, slowly and imperfectly, but they heal. This isn't about romanticizing suffering or suggesting that trauma makes people stronger. It doesn't. But it is acknowledging that people are capable of recovery, of finding joy again, of building lives worth living even after experiencing the unthinkable. If you're struggling, if you're in the midst of healing from trauma, please know that recovery is possible. You may not believe it right now. The pain may feel permanent, overwhelming, unsurvivable. But others have walked this path before you and made it through. You can too. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But it is possible. A 16th pattern is the importance of documentation. In several cases, justice was possible because of documented evidence. Text messages from Marcus to Elena showed the threats. Security footage captured Caleb's car picking up Lydia. Financial records proved Victor's fraud. Messages between the Ironwood students showed premeditation. The existence of these records made prosecution possible. If you're in a dangerous situation, document what's happening. Save threatening messages. Take photos of injuries. Keep records of financial abuse. Write down incidents with dates and details. Back up evidence in multiple places, including with trusted friends or family. This documentation can be crucial for protection orders, divorce proceedings, custody battles, and criminal prosecution. Yes, documenting abuse means confronting it, which can be painful. But it can also be empowering. It creates an objective record that can't be gaslit away. It provides validation when the abuser tries to convince you you're overreacting. And it creates evidence that can protect you and potentially stop the abuser from harming others in the future. A 17th pattern is how technology both helps and hinders safety. On one hand, technology allowed Lydia to call for a ride instead of walking home alone. It enabled Isabella's sister to research her symptoms and push for testing. It helped investigators find evidence in cases like Marcus's threatening texts. On the other hand, technology enabled Marcus to monitor Elena constantly. It allowed Caleb to pose as a rideshare driver. It gave Ethan and Mara tools to surveil and control employees. Technology is neutral. It amplifies existing dynamics, making both help and harm easier. This means we need to be thoughtful about how we use technology and aware of how it can be weaponized. We need better privacy protections. We need companies to design products with safety in mind. We need education about digital safety, especially for young people. If you're concerned about digital safety, there are steps you can take. Use strong, unique passwords. Enable two-factor authentication. Be thoughtful about what you share on social media. Understand that anything digital can potentially be monitored. If you're leaving an abusive situation, consider getting new devices that your abuser doesn't have access to. There are resources available that focus specifically on digital safety in the context of domestic violence. An 18th pattern is the role of male violence. 3 of the 5 perpetrators in these stories were men: Marcus, Caleb, and Victor. Male violence, particularly violence against women, is a pattern we can't ignore. Women are far more likely to be killed by intimate partners than men are. Women are far more likely to be sexually assaulted. This isn't about demonizing men. Most men are not violent. But we need to acknowledge that male socialization, particularly around control, entitlement, and emotional regulation, contributes to patterns of violence that primarily harm women. Addressing male violence requires work on multiple levels. It requires early education about healthy relationships, consent, and emotional expression. It requires challenging cultural messages that equate masculinity with dominance. It requires men holding other men accountable. It requires examining and reforming institutions that enable violence against women. If you're a man reading this, thank you for engaging with these difficult stories. Your role in preventing violence is crucial. Call out sexist attitudes and jokes. Model healthy relationships. Support survivors. Teach young men in your life about respect and consent. Don't stay silent when you see concerning behavior. Your voice matters, perhaps more than you realize. A 19th pattern is economic inequality and vulnerability. Several of these stories involve economic precarity. Elena worked 2 jobs and had little savings. Maribel's family couldn't afford quality mental health care and sent her to Ironwood as a last resort. Lydia's family had to save for years to afford her education. Unity Space's employees accepted poor treatment partly because they needed their jobs. Economic vulnerability makes people easier to exploit and harder to escape from dangerous situations. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't afford to leave a job, even a toxic one. When you have no savings, you can't afford to flee an abusive partner. When you lack insurance, you can't access mental health care. Economic justice and safety are intertwined. This means that addressing violence and exploitation requires addressing economic inequality. It requires living wages. It requires affordable housing. It requires accessible health care. It requires a social safety net that catches people before they become desperate. These are policy issues, but they're also safety issues. Economic security enables physical security. A 20th pattern is the failure of risk assessment. In multiple cases, authorities assessed risk incorrectly. Police didn't see Marcus as a serious threat until after he killed Elena. Ironwood staff didn't identify Ria's group as dangerous until after Bethany's murder. Investors didn't recognize Unity Spaces as fraudulent until it collapsed. Our systems for identifying and responding to risk are inadequate. Part of the problem is that risk assessment often relies on past behavior, but many perpetrators are first-time offenders at the point of their most serious crime. Marcus didn't have a criminal record. Caleb hadn't killed before. The Ironwood students had behavioral issues but hadn't committed violent crimes. Ethan looked like a successful entrepreneur until suddenly he didn't. We need better tools for assessing risk, tools that look at patterns rather than just past convictions. We need to take threats seriously even when they come from people without criminal histories. We need to train professionals, from police to social workers to judges, to recognize warning signs and respond appropriately. And we need to accept that sometimes we'll err on the side of caution and be wrong. And that's preferable to erring on the side of minimization and being right. These 20 patterns aren't exhaustive. There are other lessons in these stories, other insights to be gained. But they provide a framework for understanding how abuse and violence operate, how they can be prevented, and how we can better support survivors and hold perpetrators accountable. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. How do we take these patterns and translate them into action? How do we move from awareness to prevention? How do we create a world where stories like these become increasingly rare? Let's talk about practical steps. First, education. We need comprehensive education about healthy relationships, consent, and abuse starting young. This isn't a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue throughout childhood and adolescence. Kids need to learn what healthy relationships look like, what boundaries are and how to enforce them, what consent means in practice, and what to do if they witness or experience abuse. This education needs to happen in schools, but it can't only happen there. Parents need to have these conversations. Communities need to create spaces for these discussions. Media, from children's programming to adult content, needs to model healthy dynamics. We need a cultural shift where talking about these issues is normal and expected rather than uncomfortable and avoided. Second, accessible resources. Every community needs robust resources for people experiencing abuse. This means shelters with adequate capacity. It means legal aid for people seeking protection orders or divorces. It means counseling services. It means financial assistance. It means job training and housing support. Leaving an abusive situation is exponentially easier when there are concrete resources to support that transition. These resources need to be well-funded, which means prioritizing them in budgets at local, state, and federal levels. They need to be accessible, which means considering transportation, language barriers, disability accommodations, and childcare. And they need to be trauma-informed, which means staff trained to work with people who've experienced violence and exploitation. Third, enforcement. Laws protecting victims only matter if they're enforced. Protection orders need to be taken seriously. Violations need to result in immediate consequences. Police need better training on domestic violence dynamics. Prosecutors need to prioritize these cases. Judges need to understand the lethality of intimate partner violence and rule accordingly. This also means accountability for institutions. Schools that fail to protect students need to face consequences. Companies that enable toxic cultures need to be held liable. Financial institutions that allow fraud need better oversight. We can't just pass laws and hope for the best. We need robust enforcement mechanisms and the political will to use them. Fourth, cultural change. We need to shift how we think about power, success, and relationships. We need to stop glorifying control and domination, whether in romantic relationships, workplaces, or leadership. We need to value collaboration over competition, consent over coercion, autonomy over compliance. This means examining our own attitudes and behaviors. It means calling out friends and family when they express problematic views. It means consuming media critically and supporting content that models healthy dynamics. It means being willing to have difficult conversations about power and privilege. Cultural change is slow and often frustrating, but it's essential. Fifth, bystander intervention. We need to normalize speaking up when we see concerning behavior. This doesn't mean confronting dangerous people directly, which can be unsafe. It means checking in with potential victims, offering support, and reporting to appropriate authorities when necessary. It means trusting our instincts when something feels wrong. Bystander intervention training is increasingly common, and it works. When people know how to recognize warning signs and feel empowered to act, they do. They prevent sexual assaults at parties. They interrupt street harassment. They call authorities when they suspect abuse. We need to make this training universal, starting in schools and continuing throughout life. Sixth, supporting survivors. If someone discloses abuse to you, believe them. Don't interrogate them. Don't suggest they might be overreacting. Just believe them and ask how you can help. Offer practical support, a place to stay, money if you can afford it, help finding resources, presence at court proceedings, whatever they need. Understand that healing isn't linear and that survivors may make choices you don't agree with, like returning to their abuser. Don't abandon them. Keep offering support without judgment. Let them know they can come to you whenever they're ready, even if they've left and returned multiple times. Also recognize that supporting survivors can be emotionally taxing. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Seek support if you need it. You can't pour from an empty cup, and burning yourself out doesn't help anyone. Seventh, holding perpetrators accountable. This means supporting prosecution of violent offenders. It means demanding that employers fire people who harass or abuse. It means ostracizing people who've committed harm rather than giving them second chances they haven't earned. It means refusing to minimize or excuse abusive behavior. Accountability doesn't mean vengeance. It means appropriate consequences that prioritize victim safety and community well-being. Sometimes that's incarceration. Sometimes it's job loss. Sometimes it's being removed from positions of power. Whatever form it takes, accountability is essential for justice and for deterring future harm. Eighth, self-care and boundary setting. If you've experienced abuse, prioritize your healing. This might mean therapy. It might mean support groups. It might mean time away from work or school. It might mean cutting off contact with toxic family members. Whatever you need to heal, give yourself permission to pursue it. Healing also involves learning to set boundaries. After abuse, many survivors struggle with this. They've been conditioned to prioritize others' needs over their own. Learning to say no, to assert your needs, to remove yourself from uncomfortable situations, these are crucial skills. They might feel selfish at first, but they're actually essential for your well-being. Ninth, advocacy and activism. If you feel called to work towards systemic change, there are many ways to get involved. Volunteer at domestic violence shelters. Support organizations working on these issues financially. Contact your representatives about relevant legislation. Share educational content on social media. Speak at schools or community events. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to change. But also recognize that advocacy work can be triggering, especially for survivors. Make sure you're in a place where you can engage with this content without re-traumatizing yourself. There's no shame in needing to step back and focus on your own healing. Your well-being matters more than any cause, and you can't effectively help others if you're not taking care of yourself. 10th, hope. This might seem strange after 20,000 words about violence, abuse, and exploitation, but it's important. Despite everything you've heard tonight, most people are good. Most relationships are healthy. Most workplaces aren't toxic. Most leaders aren't exploitative. The stories we've covered are real and important, but they're not the whole picture. Progress is happening. Laws are getting better. Attitudes are shifting. Resources are expanding. Awareness is increasing. The conversation about abuse has moved from the margins to the mainstream. Movements like Me Too have empowered survivors to speak up. Technology is creating new tools for safety and accountability. Things are getting better, slowly but surely. This isn't reason for complacency. There's still enormous work to be done, but it is reason for hope. Change is possible. Prevention is possible. A world with less violence, less exploitation, less suffering is not only imaginable, it's achievable. but it requires all of us to be part of the solution. So where do we go from here? How do we honor the people in these stories, both the victims and the survivors? We do it by refusing to look away, by refusing to stay silent, by refusing to accept that abuse is inevitable or normal. We do it by building a world where control is recognized as abuse, where isolation sets off alarms, where boundary violations have consequences. We do it by supporting people trying to leave dangerous situations, by believing survivors, by holding perpetrators accountable, by demanding that institutions do better, by examining our own biases and behaviors, by raising children who respect autonomy and consent, by creating communities where everyone feels safe enough to speak up and ask for help. These stories are heavy. They're meant to be, but they're also meant to be instructive. Every pattern identified, every warning sign described, every systemic failure exposed, these are tools. They're information you can use to protect yourself and others. They're awareness that can save lives. If you take nothing else from this video, take this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't rationalize it away. Don't let others convince you you're overreacting. Your instincts exist to protect you. Listen to them. Reach out for help when you need it. There's no shame in needing support. There's no weakness in admitting you're in over your head. Other people want to help you. Let them. And if you see someone else struggling, someone who might be experiencing what these victims experienced, speak up. Check in. Offer support. Report if necessary. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Be the person who handles it. These stories, as difficult as they are, represent only a fraction of the abuse and violence that happens every day. For every Elena, Lydia, Bethany, Isabella, and Unity Space's employee whose story is told, there are countless others whose stories remain hidden. They suffer in silence. They're trapped by fear, shame, economic necessity, or lack of resources. They're waiting for someone to notice, someone to help, someone to care. You can be that someone. You can be the friend who asks the hard questions, the coworker who speaks up about toxic culture, the neighbor who calls authorities when they hear violence, the family member who offers shelter, the stranger who verifies a rideshare before getting in, the person who holds space for a survivor's story without judgment. Small actions matter. A text checking in on someone, a donation to a domestic violence shelter, a conversation with your child about consent, a vote for prosecutors who prioritize these cases. None of these actions alone will solve the problem, but collectively, they create a culture where abuse is harder to perpetrate and easier to escape. We also need to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations about male violence and how we raise boys, about economic inequality and how it enables exploitation, about the ways we glorify control and dominance in media and culture, about how justice systems fail victims, about how capitalism incentivizes exploitation. These are big, complex issues without simple solutions, but we can't solve problems we refuse to discuss. And we need to extend grace to ourselves and others. We all make mistakes. We all miss warning signs sometimes. We all fail to act when we should. That's human. What matters is that we keep trying, keep learning, keep doing better. Perfectionism isn't the goal. Progress is. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you. Thank you for being willing to sit with these difficult stories. Thank you for caring enough to learn. Thank you for being part of the solution, even if your role is just being more aware, more attentive, more willing to act when the moment comes. The people in these stories deserve better. Elena deserved to live, to raise her children, to build the life she was fighting for. Lydia deserved to finish law school, to practice law, to make the difference she wanted to make. Bethany deserved to grow up, to discover who she was, to have a future. They deserved better from the systems that failed them, from the people who could have helped but didn't, from a society that too often tolerates the intolerable. We can't bring them back. We can't undo what happened. But we can learn from their stories. We can use their experiences to inform how we move forward. We can commit to building a world where fewer people experience what they experienced, where more people survive, where systems actually protect the vulnerable instead of failing them. This isn't just about individual actions, though those matter. It's about collective responsibility. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that someone else's safety is our concern, that we have obligations to each other that extend beyond our immediate circles. It's about building communities, institutions, and cultures that prioritize well-being over power, connection over control, dignity over domination. The work is ongoing. It doesn't end with this video or with any single action. It's a commitment that requires sustained effort, day after day, choice by choice. But it's work worth doing. Because every person who escapes abuse, every crime that's prevented, every life that's saved, that matters. That's worth fighting for. Let's bring this back to something concrete. Let's talk about what you, specifically, can do starting tomorrow. Not abstract concepts or systemic change, though those matter, but practical, immediate actions. If you're currently in an abusive situation, whether physical, emotional, financial, or otherwise, please reach out for help. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available at 1-800-799-7233. They have counselors available 24/7 who can help you assess your situation, create a safety plan, and connect you with local resources. There are similar hotlines in most countries. A quick internet search for Domestic Violence Hotline, plus your country, will get you there. If you can't call safely, many hotlines now offer text or chat options. You can access help discreetly from your phone or computer. And if you're afraid your communications are being monitored, try to access these resources from a device your abuser doesn't have access to, like a library computer or a friend's phone. If you're not currently in danger, but know someone who might be, reach out to them. Not with judgment or ultimatums, but with support and care. A simple, "I've been thinking about you and wanted to check in. How are you really doing?" can open a door. Let them talk without interrupting to give advice. Just listen, validate their feelings, and ask what they need. If they're not ready to leave or don't see their situation as abusive, don't push. Just let them know you're there whenever they need you. Sometimes it takes multiple conversations over months or years before someone is ready to accept help. Your consistent, non-judgmental presence can be the lifeline they eventually grab onto. If you witness concerning behavior, whether in your workplace, social circle, or community, document it and report it to appropriate authorities. If you see a coworker being harassed, report it to HR. If you see a student being bullied, tell school administrators. If you suspect a neighbor is being abused, call the police non-emergency line to do a wellness check. You might feel like you're overreacting, but it's better to be wrong about danger than right and have stayed silent. If you're a parent, talk to your children about relationships, consent, and boundaries. Start age-appropriately young and continue the conversation as they mature. Teach them that their body belongs to them, and they have the right to say no to unwanted touch, even from family members. Teach them that other people's bodies belong to those people and must be respected. Teach them what healthy relationships look like and what red flags to watch for. Model these things too. Children learn more from what we do than what we say. If you're in a healthy relationship, let them see you and your partner communicate respectfully, resolve conflicts constructively, and maintain individual autonomy. If you're not in a healthy relationship, that's okay, you're human, but consider what messages your relationship might be sending to your children and whether changes need to be made. If you're an educator, incorporate discussions of healthy relationships, consent, and power dynamics into your curriculum where appropriate. Create a classroom culture where students feel safe reporting concerns and where respect is non-negotiable. Pay attention to warning signs among your students: isolation, changes in behavior, signs of physical harm, fear of particular people. You might be the only safe adult in a student's life. Take that responsibility seriously. If you're an employer or manager, create a workplace culture where harassment and abuse aren't tolerated. Take complaints seriously and investigate them promptly. Provide training on these issues. Make it clear that retaliation against people who report problems will result in termination. Model respectful behavior in your own interactions. And pay attention to power dynamics in your organization. Who has power over whom? How might that power be abused? What safeguards are in place? If you're in a position to hire, consider people with gaps in their resumes who might have taken time off to escape abusive situations or recover from trauma. Don't penalize people for having nonlinear career paths. Some of the most resilient, capable employees are people who've overcome significant adversity. If you're in a helping profession, whether healthcare, social work, education, or law enforcement, get training on trauma-informed care. Understand how trauma affects behavior and decision-making. Learn to recognize signs of abuse. Know what resources are available in your community. An advocate within your profession for better policies and practices around abuse and violence. If you're in a position of informal authority, whether as a community leader, coach, mentor, or elder, use that position to model healthy relationship dynamics and call out concerning behavior when you see it. Young people especially need positive role models who demonstrate that power can be used to uplift rather than control. If you have money to spare, donate to organizations working on these issues. Local domestic violence shelters often operate on shoestring budgets and need support. National organizations like the National Network to End Domestic Violence, RAIN, or the National Center on Domestic and Sexual Violence do crucial work on policy, education, and research. Even small donations help. If you don't have money but have time, volunteer. Shelters need people to staff hotlines, provide childcare, organize donations, and more. Courts need advocates to support victims through legal processes. Schools need mentors for at-risk youth. There are many ways to contribute beyond financial donations. If you're active on social media, use your platform to raise awareness about these issues. Share resources. Amplify survivors' voices. Call out harmful attitudes and behaviors in your circles. Social media can be toxic, but it can also be a powerful tool for education and advocacy when used thoughtfully. But also take care of your own mental health. Engaging with content about violence and abuse is heavy. It takes a toll. If you find yourself overwhelmed, anxious, or despairing, it's okay to step back. Take breaks from this content. Engage in activities that bring you joy. Seek support if you need it. You can help others effectively if you're burned out. Practice self-compassion too. If you've made mistakes, if you've missed warning signs, if you failed to act when you should have, forgive yourself. Learn from it, and do better going forward, but don't drown in guilt. Guilt doesn't help anyone. Action does. Think about your own relationships and behavior patterns. Are there ways you might be controlling others, even inadvertently? Do you respect others' boundaries? Do you pressure people when they say no? Do you use money or other resources to control people? Are you jealous or possessive? Do you isolate partners from their friends and family? These are hard questions, but honest self-reflection is crucial. If you recognize concerning patterns in yourself, get help. Talk to a therapist. Read about healthy relationship dynamics. Do the work to change. Acknowledging problems is the first step. Following through with change is the hard part, but it's doable with commitment and support. For men specifically, examine how you think about and interact with women. Do you see women as equals, as fully autonomous people deserving of respect? Or are there ways you've internalized messages about male dominance and female submission? Do you respect women's no's, whether in sexual contexts or otherwise? Do you speak up when other men express sexist attitudes or harass women? Men's work to prevent violence against women is crucial and often overlooked. For people in privileged positions, whether by wealth, race, education, or other factors, recognize how that privilege can be used to help others. You might have resources, connections, or credibility that others lack. Use them. Advocate for people with less privilege. Open doors. Share opportunities. Challenge systems that enable abuse and exploitation. Remember that privilege doesn't make you a bad person, but failing to acknowledge it and use it for good is a missed opportunity. You didn't choose your advantages, but you can choose what you do with them. For those who've caused harm, whether through abuse, harassment, exploitation, or violence, real accountability means more than apologizing. It means making amends where possible, accepting consequences without self-pity, and doing the work to ensure you never harm anyone that way again. It means recognizing that forgiveness isn't something you're entitled to, and that some relationships and opportunities may be permanently closed to you as a result of your actions. True accountability is uncomfortable. It requires facing the harm you've caused without making excuses. It requires accepting that you might be seen as the villain in someone else's story and recognizing that their perception is valid based on your actions. It requires humility, sustained effort, and genuine change, not just performative contrition. For allies, recognize that your role is to support survivors and amplify their voices, not to speak for them or center yourself in their stories. Listen more than you talk. Follow the lead of people with lived experience. Acknowledge when you get things wrong and commit to doing better. Being a good ally means staying engaged even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're not getting praise for it, even when the work feels thankless. It means recognizing that this isn't about you feeling good about yourself. It's about reducing harm and supporting people who need support. For survivors, please know that whatever you're feeling is valid. Anger, sadness, fear, numbness, confusion, all of it makes sense given what you've been through. There's no right way to survive trauma. There's no timeline for healing. You get to process this however you need to. And please know that what happened to you wasn't your fault. No matter what choices you made, no matter what warning signs you missed, no matter what you could have done differently, the blame rests entirely with the person who chose to harm you. You didn't cause the abuse. You didn't deserve it. And you're not broken or damaged because of it. You're a person who survived something terrible. You're still here. That takes incredible strength, even if you don't feel strong. You are. And you will heal, in your own time, in your own way. Be patient with yourself. Reach out for support when you're ready. Therapy, especially trauma-focused approaches like EMDR or CBT, can be incredibly helpful. Support groups connect you with people who understand. Hotlines provide immediate support during crisis. You don't have to do this alone. And if you're not ready for formal support, that's okay too. Sometimes healing starts with small things. Taking a walk, calling a friend, journaling, doing something you enjoy. Whatever brings you even a moment of peace or joy, do more of that. Healing isn't linear, but every small step forward matters. For those who love survivors, understand that supporting them can be frustrating. They might not make choices you agree with. They might return to their abuser. They might seem stuck. But your role isn't to fix them or make decisions for them. It's to be a consistent, supportive presence. Offer practical help, childcare, money, a place to stay, transportation, whatever you can provide. But also respect their autonomy. They've had their choices controlled. The best thing you can do is give them back their power to choose, even if their choices scare you. And take care of yourself. Supporting someone through trauma recovery is emotionally demanding. Make sure you have your own support system. Set boundaries if you need to. It's not selfish to protect your own well-being. You can't pour from an empty cup. We're coming to the end now. We've covered 5 stories, identified 20 patterns, discussed practical actions, and sat with a lot of difficult truths. If you're still here, still listening, that matters. Engagement with hard topics is how we create change. Let's return one final time to where we started, control. These 5 stories, different as they are, all center on control. Someone deciding they had the right to determine another person's choices, freedom, safety, life. Marcus controlling Elena through isolation, monitoring, and ultimately violence. Caleb controlling Lydia through deception and force. Rhea, Damon, and Lena controlling Maribel through manipulation and fear. Victor controlling Isabella through finances and poison. Ethan and Mara controlling employees through ideology and exploitation. Control is the root. It's what ties these stories together. And recognizing control in its many forms is how we prevent future tragedies. Control doesn't always look like violence. Often it looks normal, even loving. It looks like concern, like protection, like knowing what's best for someone. It disguises itself as care while slowly tightening its grip. That's why awareness is so crucial. When you know what control looks like, when you can identify isolation, monitoring, financial abuse, love bombing, gaslighting, when you understand these tactics, you're better equipped to recognize them in real time. In your own relationships, in your friends' relationships, in your workplace, in institutions you're part of. And when you recognize control, you have a choice. Collude with it through silence, or resist it through action. That action might be leaving a relationship. It might be speaking up at work. It might be reporting abuse. It might be offering support to someone experiencing it. But it's action nonetheless. Silence enables control. It allows abusers to operate without accountability. It isolates victims further. It sends a message that what's happening is acceptable or at least tolerable. Breaking that silence, even when it's uncomfortable or scary, is how we disrupt the patterns that enable abuse. Each of these stories represents a life, or multiple lives, forever changed by violence and exploitation. Elena's children growing up without their mother. Lydia's family carrying grief that never fully heals. Bethany's parents living with a loss no parent should endure. Isabella rebuilding from devastation. Former Unity Spaces employees recovering from exploitation and betrayal. These aren't just stories. They're people. Real human beings who laughed and cried and dreamed and loved, and hoped for futures they never got to see. They matter. Their experiences matter. And the only way to honor them is to learn from what happened and work to prevent it from happening again. But we also have to acknowledge a hard truth. We can't prevent all violence and abuse. Even with perfect systems, perfect awareness, perfect intervention, some harm will still occur. Because people have free will, and some people choose to use that free will to hurt others. That's a painful reality to accept. What we can do is reduce harm. We can make abuse harder to perpetrate and easier to escape. We can create cultures where control is recognized and rejected. We can build systems that actually protect vulnerable people. We can support survivors in their healing. We can hold perpetrators accountable. We can save some lives, help some people, make some difference. And that has to be enough. Perfect isn't achievable, but better is. And better is worth working toward. Think about the ripples from these stories. Elena's death led to advocacy that's helped other victims in Harbor City. Lydia's murder sparked safety reforms that have likely prevented other attacks. Bethany's death resulted in better oversight at institutions like Ironwood. Isabella's survival has supported other women escaping similar situations. Unity Space's collapse warned others about cult-like workplaces. Out of tragedy came learning. Out of loss came change. Not enough change, perhaps. Not fast enough change, certainly. But change nonetheless. And that change happened because people refused to accept these tragedies as inevitable. They demanded better. They worked for better. They created better. You can be part of that. You can be someone who refuses to accept the status quo. Someone who demands accountability. Someone who supports survivors. Someone who intervenes when they see harm. Someone who models healthy relationships and respectful behavior. Someone who teaches young people about consent and boundaries. Someone who creates safe spaces in their workplace and community. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to solve systemic oppression single-handedly. You just have to do something. Whatever your resources, skills, and position allow. Every action matters. Every person whose help matters. Every life saved matters. The work can feel overwhelming. The problems can seem insurmountable. The news is full of stories like the ones you've heard tonight. And it's easy to feel despairing, to feel like nothing you do makes a difference. But that's not true. Your actions matter. Your choices matter. Your willingness to engage with these difficult topics matters. Change happens through accumulated small actions. Through millions of people making slightly better choices, being slightly more aware, acting slightly more courageously. Through the accumulation of those actions over time. It's not dramatic. It's not usually recognized. But it's powerful. So as we close, here's what I want you to take away. You have power. Maybe not world-changing, headline-making power. But you have the power to make different choices. To be kinder. To be more attentive. To speak up. To reach out. To support. To change. Use that power. Use it to create safety for yourself and others. Use it to challenge control wherever you see it. Use it to build the kind of world where stories like Elena's, Lydia's, Bethany's, Isabella's, and Unity Space's employees become increasingly rare. The people in these stories deserve that world. They deserved safety, respect, autonomy, dignity, life. They didn't get it. But future Elena's, Lydia's, Bethany's, Isabella's, and exploited employees might, if we do the work. That's why these stories need to be told. Not to sensationalize tragedy, not to trigger fear, but to educate, to warn, to inspire action. To say this happened, here's how, here's why, and here's what we can do to prevent it from happening again. If you take nothing else from these hours together, take this. Trust your instincts. Believe survivors. Hold perpetrators accountable. Build communities of care. Choose action over silence. Choose courage over comfort. Choose connection over control. These aren't easy choices. They're often uncomfortable. They can be costly personally and socially. But they're necessary. They're how we create change, how we prevent harm, how we honor the people we've lost, and support the people still here. You're at the end of this video now. You've heard difficult things. You've sat with uncomfortable truths. You've invested hours in understanding patterns of abuse and violence. That wasn't easy, and I'm grateful you did it. Now comes the harder part. Taking what you've learned and applying it. Staying aware. Speaking up. Acting. Not just today or tomorrow, but consistently, over time, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when it feels futile. That's the real work. And it's work that matters more than almost anything else you could do. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing any of us can do is reduce suffering and increase safety for ourselves and others. Everything else is secondary to that fundamental moral obligation we have to each other. So go forward from here with eyes open, with awareness of patterns and red flags, with willingness to act when action is needed, with compassion for those experiencing harm, with accountability for those causing it, with commitment to building something better. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are millions of people working toward the same goals, trying to create the same changes, fighting the same fights. You're part of something larger than yourself, a collective effort to make the world safer and more just. That's powerful. That's meaningful. That's worth doing. Before we close, if you found value in this video, in these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. Content like this takes time and research to produce, and your support makes it possible. Leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what resonated with you. Hit the like button if this video made you think, even if it was difficult to hear. But more importantly than any of that, take what you've learned here and use it. Share it. Act on it. Let these stories change you, and let that change ripple outward into your relationships, your community, your world. The people in these stories can't be here to advocate for themselves. Elena, Lydia, and Bethany are gone. Isabella and Unity Space's survivors are still healing. So we have to advocate for them. We have to tell their stories. We have to learn from their experiences. We have to do better. And we can. We can create a world with less violence, less exploitation, less suffering. It won't happen overnight. It won't happen through any single action. But it will happen if enough of us commit to the work, day after day, choice by choice, interaction by interaction. That's my hope in creating this video. That you'll be one of those people. That you'll take what you've learned and use it for good. That you'll be someone who recognizes control and challenges it. Someone who sees harm and acts to stop it. Someone who supports survivors and holds perpetrators accountable. Someone who builds the better world we all deserve. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring enough to listen to difficult stories. Thank you for being willing to learn and grow and change. You matter. Your actions matter. Never forget that. Different lives. Different worlds. Same warning signs. Same opportunity to act. Same choice between silence and action. Between complicity and courage. Between accepting things as they are and working for things as they should be. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose action. And may we all work toward a world where stories like these become relics of the past rather than warnings for the present. A world where control is recognized and rejected. Where abuse is prevented, not just punished. Where everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, can live safely, freely, and with dignity. That's the world worth building. That's the work worth doing. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And go forward with awareness, compassion, and the courage to act when action is needed. Good night.